I've been with the FBI for 11 years, and I thought I'd seen everything the human mind could inflict on itself and others. Serial killers in the Pacific Northwest, human trafficking rings along the Texas border, white-collar crimes that destroyed entire communities. I'd worked them all with the same methodical detachment they teach you at Quantico, but nothing in my training prepared me for what happened in the Arizona desert during the summer of 2019. My name is Special Agent Rebecca Hartley, and this is the one case I still can't fully explain. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday morning in late June. I was in the Phoenix field office, working through paperwork on an interstate fraud case, when my supervisor, Assistant Director Marcus Chen, called me into his office. The air conditioning was fighting a losing battle against the 110-degree heat outside, and Chen looked tired, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his tie loosened. "Hartley, I need you to take a drive up to Kayenta County," he said, sliding a thin folder across his desk. "Sheriff's Department up there requested federal assistance on a missing persons case." I picked up the folder. Missing persons cases didn't usually warrant FBI involvement unless there were specific circumstances. Crossing state lines, suspected abduction, patterns indicating serial activity. What makes this federal? "It's the third one in 8 months," Chen said, leaning back in his chair. "All adults, all disappeared without a trace from the same stretch of highway near a town called Mesa Hollow. Population maybe 300. It's close to the Navajo Nation border, mostly desert. Nothing out there but a gas station and an old motel. Local sheriffs overwhelmed, and the Navajo Nation police are concerned because 2 of the missing were Native American, last seen traveling through that area. Any evidence of foul play? None. That's what's strange. Vehicles found abandoned, personal belongings left behind, no signs of struggle, no blood, no witnesses. It's like these people just stopped existing." He paused. "The latest disappearance was 4 days ago. Woman named Sarah Navarro, 32, elementary school teacher from Flagstaff. She was driving to visit her sister in Chinle. Should have been a straight shot on Route 160. Her car was found on the shoulder about 2 miles outside Mesa Hollow. Keys in the ignition, phone on the passenger seat, purse in the back. Door was open, no Sarah." I flipped through the folder. The other 2 victims were James Whitfield, a 45-year-old long-haul trucker from Oklahoma who'd been passing through, and Daniel Sosi, a 28-year-old Navajo man who worked construction and was heading home to many farms. Different ages, different backgrounds, no apparent connection except that final stretch of desert highway. "You want me to go alone?" "Take Morrison if you want backup, but honestly, I think this is going to be a lot of legwork and not much else. Could be coincidence. Could be people starting new lives. But 3 and 8 months, all from the same area, all leaving everything behind. That's enough to warrant a look." He tapped the folder. "The local sheriff is Tom Beckman. He's been cooperative, sent us everything he has. Not much, but it's a start." I drove north that afternoon, watching the landscape change from the sprawl of Phoenix to the empty vastness of the high desert. The further I got from the city, the more the modern world seemed to fall away. Billboard advertisements became sparse, then non-existent. Gas stations appeared every 50 miles instead of every 5. Cell phone signal flickered in and out like a dying candle. Mesa Hollow sat in a basin between 2 rust-colored mesas that rose like ancient sentinels on either side of Route 160. The town itself was barely worthy of the name. A Chevron station with 2 pumps, a diner called Betty's that looked like it hadn't been updated since 1975, a combination post office and general store, and the Desert Rose Motel, a single-story structure with peeling pink paint and a flickering neon vacancy sign. The sheriff's office was a small building made of cinder blocks, painted tan to match the desert. I parked my Bureau sedan next to 2 county vehicles and a dusty pickup truck. The heat hit me like a physical force when I stepped out of the air-conditioned car. It was past 5 in the evening, but the thermometer on the building's wall read 103 degrees. Sheriff Tom Beckman met me at the door. He was in his late 50s, weathered and lean, with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much sun. He shook my hand with a grip that was firm but not aggressive. "Agent Hartley, thanks for coming up. Can I get you some water, coffee?" Water would be great. His office was small and utilitarian. A metal desk, filing cabinets, a corkboard covered with notices and wanted posters. He handed me a bottle of water from a small refrigerator and gestured to a chair. "I suppose A.D. Chen filled you in on what we've got here. 3 missing persons, all from this area, all within 8 months." I pulled out a notebook. "Tell me about the first one." James Whitfield. Beckman settled into his chair with a sigh. November 19th last year. Whitfield was a trucker, hauling electronics from California to Albuquerque. His rig was found about 3 miles east of here, pulled over on the shoulder. Engine running, driver's door open, CB radio still on. His logbook showed he'd stopped for fuel at the Chevron around midnight. Betty, she owns the diner, she remembers him coming in for coffee around 12:30. Said he seemed fine, normal, tired like most truckers. He paid cash, left a decent tip, and that's the last anyone saw of him. No signs of a struggle at the truck? Nothing. We searched the whole area, brought in search and rescue, even had the Navajo Nation police help us grid search the desert for a 1/4 mile in every direction. Found nothing. No footprints, no blood, no personal items. It was like he stepped out of that truck and vanished into thin air. I made notes. And the second victim? Daniel Sosi, February 14th, Valentine's Day. Beckman pulled out a file and slid it across the desk. 28 years old, worked construction over in Tuba City. He was driving home to many farms to see his family. His car, a 2012 Ford Focus, was found on the westbound shoulder, about a mile outside town. Same story. Keys in the ignition, wallet on the dash, phone dead, but charging cable still plugged in. No Daniel. Did he stop anywhere in town? No one remembers seeing him, but that was late. Around 11 at night. Most folks here are in bed by 9. Beckman leaned forward. "Here's what bothers me, Agent Hartley. These disappearances, they all happened at night. All on the same stretch of road, all within about a 3-mile radius. And all the vehicles were found in good working order, doors open, like the drivers just got out and walked away. What about Sarah Navarro?" Same pattern, June 22nd, around 10:30 at night. She'd called her sister from Flagstaff around 8, said she'd be there in a few hours. Never showed up. We found her car the next morning. Everything you'd expect was there. Luggage, overnight bag, even a thermos of coffee still warm when we found it. I studied the map Beckman had laid out on his desk. The 3 locations where the vehicles had been found were marked with red pins. They formed a rough triangle around Mesa Hollow, all on Route 160, all within sight of the 2 mesas. Have you considered the possibility that they're connected? Maybe someone living in the area? Thought about it. We've got maybe 280 permanent residents in Mesa Hollow. I know every one of them, ran background checks on anyone with a history, came up empty. Most folks here are retirees, a few ranch families, some workers from the Navajo Nation who commute to jobs in Flag or Tuba City. Nobody with violent priors, nobody who stands out. What about transients, people passing through? That's the thing about this stretch of road. Not many people do pass through. It's not a major route unless you're specifically heading to the Navajo Nation or cutting across from Flagstaff to the Four Corners area. We get maybe a dozen vehicles a day, if that. The sun was setting when I left the sheriff's office, painting the mesas in shades of orange and deep red. I'd booked a room at the Desert Rose Motel, the only accommodation in town. The woman at the desk was in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a bun and kind eyes magnified by thick glasses. "You're the FBI agent," she said as I signed the register. It wasn't a question. "News travels fast. A small town." She handed me a key attached to a turquoise keychain with the number 7 on it. "You're here about the missing folks." "Yes, ma'am." She studied me for a moment, then leaned across the counter. "My name's Dorothy Reeves. I've owned this place for 42 years. I've seen a lot of strange things in that time, but nothing like this." She glanced toward the window, toward this darkening desert beyond. "People go missing out here sometimes. Hikers who don't prepare for the heat, tourists who wander off the road, but these folks, they weren't tourists. They knew how to handle themselves, and they all disappeared the same way." "What do you think happened to them?" Dorothy hesitated. "I don't know, but I'll tell you this. There's something about those mesas at night. You can hear things out there, sounds that don't quite make sense. My late husband, he used to say the desert plays tricks on you, especially when the wind comes down through the canyons. But these sounds, they're different." "Different how?" "Rhythmic. Like drums, almost, but not quite. And sometimes, when there's no wind at all, you can hear what sounds like voices." Navajo folks have stories about this area, old stories. They say there are places in the desert that don't follow the same rules as everywhere else. Places where time moves differently, where the veil between this world and others is thin. I'd heard similar stories before in different contexts. Every culture had its explanations for the unexplainable. Its folklore built around mysterious disappearances. But I'd learned long ago that behind every legend was usually a mundane truth. Still, I appreciated the information. "Have you heard these sounds yourself?" "Once or twice. Late at night, when I'm doing the books. It's faint, but it's there, like a heartbeat in the distance." My room was clean but sparse, a double bed with a floral bedspread, a small television bolted to the wall, a bathroom with fixtures that probably dated back to the motel's construction in the 60s. I set up my laptop on the small desk and spent the next few hours reviewing everything the sheriff's department had sent to the bureau. The case files were frustratingly thin. No forensic evidence, no witnesses, no surveillance footage. The Chevron station had one camera covering the pumps, but it had been broken for months. Betty's diner didn't have security cameras at all. The most promising lead was Sarah Navarro's phone, which had been recovered from her car. The tech team in Phoenix was analyzing it, but the preliminary report showed nothing unusual. Her last call had been to her sister at 8:07 p.m. After that, nothing. I pulled up the topographical maps of the area, studying the terrain. The mesas were solid rock, rising about 800 feet above the desert floor. Between them, the land was mostly flat, dotted with sagebrush and creosote bushes. There were a few dirt roads leading off the main highway, old ranch roads and access routes used by the power company to maintain transmission lines, but nothing that suggested obvious hiding places or locations where someone could dispose of a body undetected. Around midnight, I closed my laptop and stood at the window, looking out at the desert. The moon was a thin crescent, providing almost no light. The darkness out here was absolute, the kind of darkness you never experienced in a city. No streetlights, no house lights, nothing but an endless black void punctuated by stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. And then I heard it. It was faint at first, so faint I thought I might be imagining it. A low, rhythmic sound, like distant thunder or the bass line of music playing far away. But it wasn't thunder, and it wasn't music. It was something else, something that resonated in a way that made my chest feel tight. I opened the window, letting in the cool night air. The sound continued, steady and unchanging. I tried to pinpoint its direction, but it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. From the mesas, maybe, or from the empty desert between them. I stood there for 10 minutes, listening. The sound never varied, never grew louder or softer. It just existed, a constant presence in the night. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was so complete it felt oppressive, like the desert was holding its breath. I closed the window and sat on the edge of the bed. Dorothy Reeves' words echoed in my mind. Sounds that don't quite make sense, like drums, almost, but not quite. I didn't believe in supernatural explanations. I'd spent my entire career proving that monsters were human, that the unexplainable usually had a rational explanation once you dug deep enough. But I couldn't deny what I'd just heard, and I couldn't explain it. Sleep didn't come easily that night. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of endless highways stretching through darkness, of cars sitting empty on desert shoulders, of voices calling out in languages I couldn't understand. The next morning, I met Sheriff Beckman at Betty's Diner for breakfast. The place was exactly what you'd expect from a small-town diner. Red vinyl booths, a long counter with chrome stools, a jukebox in the corner playing country music. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the air. There were maybe half a dozen people scattered around the dining room, all of them turning to look when I walked in. Betty herself was a stout woman in her 60s with dyed red hair and a friendly smile. "You must be the FBI agent. Tom told me you were coming." She handed me a laminated menu. "Coffee? Please." Beckman was already seated in a booth near the window, working his way through a plate of eggs and hash browns. I slid in across from him. "Morning, Agent Hartley. Sleep okay?" "Well enough." I didn't mention the sounds I'd heard, not yet. "I want to visit the locations where the vehicles were found. Start with Sarah Navarro's car, then work backward." "Sure thing. I figured you would. I can take you out there after breakfast." Betty brought my coffee and took my order. While we waited, I asked Beckman about the town's history. "Has anything like this ever happened before? Any pattern of disappearances?" "Not like this. We've had the occasional missing person over the years, but they usually turn up. Drunk who wandered into the desert and sobered up 20 miles away. Domestic situations where someone left their spouse and didn't want to be found. But nothing like these three. These are different." "How so?" "The completeness of it. No bodies, no ransom demands if it's kidnapping, no contact of any kind. It's like they ceased to exist the moment they stepped out of their vehicles." He took a sip of coffee. "I've been a cop for 34 years, Agent Hartley. Started as a deputy in Tucson, worked my way up. I've seen murders, suicides, accidents of every kind. I've learned to trust my gut, and my gut tells me something very wrong is happening here. I just can't figure out what." After breakfast, we drove east on Route 160 in Beckman's county vehicle. The morning sun was already intense, the heat rising in visible waves from the asphalt. We passed the Chevron station, the last outpost of civilization, and continued into the emptiness beyond. 2 miles out, Beckman pulled onto the shoulder. "This is where we found Sarah Navarro's car." I got out and looked around. The landscape was featureless in every direction. Scrub brush, rocks, the distant mesas rising like walls on either side of the highway. The shoulder was gravel and hard-packed dirt, still marked with tire impressions from when the car had been towed. "Show me exactly how the car was positioned." Beckman pointed. Front wheels were straight, angled slightly toward the desert. Driver's door was open all the way, not just cracked. She'd pulled over deliberately, put it in park, turned the engine off. The hazard lights weren't on, but that might not mean anything. Some people forget. I walked in a slow circle around the location, studying the ground. The desert floor was a mixture of sand, gravel, and small rocks. Not ideal for preserving footprints, but not impossible either. Your team searched the immediate area? Grid pattern, quarter-mile radius. We found tire tracks, but they were from our own vehicles and the tow truck. No other footprints except Sarah's leading away from the car for maybe 20 feet, then nothing. Nothing? They just stopped? Completely. It was like she took 20 steps and then either flew away or was picked up by something. I knelt down where Beckman indicated the footprints had ended. The ground looked undisturbed, just normal desert sand and gravel. No signs of a struggle, no indication that anyone had been dragged. Just 20 feet of footprints and then absence. What about the other two locations? We spent the next 2 hours visiting the spots where James Whitfield's truck and Daniel Sosey's car had been found. The pattern was identical at each site. Vehicles in good working order, doors open, personal belongings left behind, and footprints that led a short distance into the desert before disappearing completely. Standing at Daniel Sosey's location, I felt that same uneasy sensation I'd experienced the night before. The silence out here was absolute, broken only by the occasional whisper of wind. The sun beat down mercilessly, but I felt cold. "Sheriff, have you experienced anything unusual out here? Heard anything strange?" Beckman looked at me carefully. "Like what?" "I don't know. Sounds that don't make sense. Feelings of being watched." He was quiet for a moment. "Why do you ask?" "Last night, around midnight, I heard something. A rhythmic sound, like drums or a heartbeat. It lasted about 10 minutes, then stopped." Beckman's expression changed. Not surprise exactly, but recognition. "Yeah, I've heard it too. So have a few other folks in town. We don't talk about it much because it sounds crazy, but it's there. Some nights more than others." "What do you think it is?" "I honestly don't know. Could be wind coming through the canyons and the mesas, creating some kind of acoustic effect. Could be machinery from somewhere, though God knows what machinery would be out here. Or it could be exactly what it sounds like, which is something I can't explain." We drove back to town in silence. I spent the rest of the day interviewing residents, starting with Betty from the diner. She confirmed that James Whitfield had stopped for coffee the night he disappeared. "He seemed fine," she said. "Tired, like truckers always are, but nothing unusual. We talked about the weather, about his route. He mentioned he was behind schedule and needed to make up time. He drank his coffee fast, left $4 on the counter for a $2 cup, and walked out. I watched him get in his truck and pull back onto the highway. Yeah, that was the last I saw of him." "Did you notice anyone else around? Any other vehicles?" "Not that I remember. It was late, after midnight. We don't get much traffic that time of night." I spoke with the Chevron station attendant, a young Navajo man named Joseph Benally. He'd been working the night Daniel Sosey disappeared. "I didn't see him," Joseph said, "but I was inside most of the night, doing inventory. If he didn't stop for gas, I wouldn't have noticed him driving past." "Have you heard the sounds people talk about? The drums or heartbeat?" Joseph's expression became guarded. "I've heard things. My grandmother, she says this area has always been special. Not good special, not bad special, just different. There are old stories about places like this, where the boundaries aren't as solid as they are elsewhere." "Boundaries?" "Between here and there. Between what is and what was, the old people. They knew to avoid certain places at certain times. But most folks don't believe in that anymore." "Do you believe it?" He considered the question. "I believe there are things we don't understand. Things that can't be explained by science or logic. My grandmother, she's 102 years old, still sharp as a tack. She says the disappearances, they're not new. She remembers stories from when she was a girl about people vanishing near the mesas. It didn't happen often, maybe once every 20 or 30 years, but it happened. That evening, I sat in my motel room reviewing my notes. The rational part of my brain kept trying to find a logical explanation. A serial killer operating in the area, disposing of bodies in a way that left no trace. Human trafficking, though that didn't explain the abandoned vehicles. Voluntary disappearances, people running from their lives, though 3 and 8 months seemed like too many for coincidence. But none of those explanations felt right. There was something else here, something I wasn't seeing. Around 10 p.m., I decided to drive back out to the location where Sarah Navarro's car had been found. I didn't tell Beckman. This wasn't official bureau procedure. This was instinct, the same instinct that had made me a good agent for 11 years. The night was clear, the stars brilliant against the black sky. I parked on the shoulder exactly where Sarah's car had been and turned off the engine. The silence was immediate and complete. I sat there for a few minutes, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness, listening. Nothing. I got out of the car, leaving the door open, and walked 20 paces into the desert. This was approximately where Sarah's footprints had ended. I stood still, barely breathing, waiting. The sound started gradually, so quietly at first that I thought I was imagining it. That same rhythmic pulse I'd heard the night before, but clearer now, more distinct. Not quite drums, not quite a heartbeat. Something in between, something organic but also mechanical. My FBI training told me to get back in the car, to call for backup, to approach this rationally. But something else, some deeper instinct, kept me rooted to the spot. I turned slowly, trying to determine the source of the sound. The mesas. The sound was coming from the mesas, or from between them. As I stared into the darkness, I could swear I saw something. Not a light exactly, but a quality to the air that was different. A shimmer, like heat distortion. But it was night and cold. The sound grew louder, more insistent. My heart began to race. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get back in the car and drive away. But I needed to understand. I needed to know. I took a step forward toward the shimmer in the air. The sound changed pitch, becoming higher, almost like a frequency I could feel more than hear. The shimmer grew more pronounced. I could see it clearly now, a distortion in the air about 50 feet away, roughly circular, maybe 10 feet in diameter. I took another step. Behind me, my car door slammed shut. The sound was so sudden and unexpected that I spun around, my hand instinctively going to the weapon at my hip. But there was no one there. The car sat undisturbed on the shoulder, the door that had been open now closed. There was no wind. When I turned back to look at the shimmer, it was gone. The sound stopped abruptly, and the silence that followed was so profound it felt like a physical pressure. I stood there for several minutes, my heart pounding, trying to make sense of what I'd just experienced. A rational explanation. There had to be a rational explanation. A trick of the light, of the desert, of my own tired mind. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew what I'd heard. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I'd just come very close to disappearing myself. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my motel room, lights on, laptop open, trying to document what I'd experienced while it was still fresh in my memory. But every time I started to type, my fingers would hesitate over the keyboard. How could I put this in an official report? How could I explain to my supervisor that I'd witnessed something I couldn't identify, something that defied every principle of investigative work I'd been taught? By dawn, I'd written and deleted 3 different versions. The final version was clinical, stripped of emotion and speculation. Conducted night surveillance at subject vehicle location. Observed unusual acoustic phenomena, origin undetermined. Possible atmospheric or geographical factors contributing to sound distortion. Recommend further investigation with technical support. It was the truth, but it wasn't the whole truth. At 7 a.m., Sheriff Beckman called my cell phone. "Agent Hartley, we've got a situation. Can you meet me at the office right away?" 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from him, listening to news that made my blood run cold. "Dorothy Reeves didn't show up to open the motel office this morning," Beckman said. "Her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who runs the post office, she got worried and went to check on her. Dorothy's car is in her driveway. Her house is unlocked. Coffee pot was on, still warm, but no Dorothy." I felt my stomach drop. When was she last seen? "Yesterday evening, around 6 p.m. She closed up the motel office for the night and went home, same as always. Mrs. Chen saw her watering her garden around 7. After that, nothing. Her house is in town? 3 blocks from Main Street. Nowhere near Route 160. Nowhere near where the others disappeared." Beckman leaned forward, his face drawn with worry and fatigue. "This changes everything, doesn't it? If Dorothy vanished from her own home, it means the disappearances aren't limited to that stretch of highway." We spent the next hour searching Dorothy's house. It was a small, neat bungalow filled with photographs and mementos from 42 years of running the Desert Rose Motel. Everything appeared normal. No signs of struggle, no indication of forced entry. Her purse was on the kitchen counter, her phone charging on the nightstand. The television in the living room was on, tuned to a cable news channel, volume low. In the kitchen, a half-drunk cup of coffee sat on the table next to an open magazine. I touched the cup, stone cold. "What time does the sun set here this time of year?" I asked. "Around 8:15, 8:30. Mrs. Chen saw her at 7. The coffee is cold, which means it's been sitting here for hours. If Dorothy made this coffee after Mrs. Chen saw her, she disappeared sometime between 7 and, say, 9 p.m. Beckman made a note. "I'll have deputies canvass the neighborhood, see if anyone saw or heard anything unusual." I walked through the house again, this time focusing on details. Dorothy Reeves had lived alone since her husband died 12 years ago. The house showed the marks of a solitary but content life. Books on every surface, a half-finished crossword puzzle, comfortable furniture arranged for one person's convenience. In the bedroom, I found her reading glasses on the nightstand, next to a paperback mystery novel. The book was face down, open to page 187, as if she'd been interrupted while reading. I picked up the book and felt something shift in my understanding of the case. Dorothy had been in bed, reading. She'd gotten up for some reason, left the book here and never came back. But why would she go to the kitchen to make coffee if she was already settled in for the night? Unless she'd heard something. I returned to the living room where Beckman was on the phone with one of his deputies. When he hung up, I asked, "Does Dorothy's house have a view of the mesas?" He frowned. "No, it faces east. You can't see the mesas from here at all. Why?" "Just trying to understand the geography." But my mind was racing. If Dorothy couldn't see the mesas from her house, what had drawn her outside? What had made her leave her comfortable bed and her book? We spent the rest of the morning conducting interviews. Mrs. Chen, Dorothy's neighbor, was a tiny Chinese-American woman in her 80s, sharp-eyed and observant. "Dorothy and we had the same routine every evening," she said. "We'd both be in our gardens around 6:30, 7 o'clock when it starts to cool down. We'd wave to each other, sometimes chat over the fence. Last night was no different. She was watering her roses, I was pulling weeds. We talked about the heat, about the FBI agent staying at her motel." She glanced at me apologetically. No offense, dear. None taken. Did Dorothy seem worried about anything? Anxious? Not particularly, although Mrs. Chen hesitated. She did mention that she'd been hearing those sounds again. The ones from the desert. She said they'd been louder lately, more frequent. It bothered her, I could tell, but she tried to laugh it off. Did she say when she'd heard them? The past few nights, I think. She said it was keeping her up. I exchanged a glance with Beckman. Mrs. Chen, did you hear anything unusual last night? Any sounds from Dorothy's house or from outside? The old woman thought carefully. I went to bed early, around 8. I'm a light sleeper, so I usually hear everything. Cars passing, dogs barking, the wind. But last night, I don't remember hearing anything at all. It was very quiet, almost too quiet if that makes sense. It made perfect sense. The same oppressive silence I'd experienced in the desert. By noon, Beckman's deputies had interviewed everyone on Dorothy's street. No one had heard or seen anything unusual. No strange vehicles, no suspicious people, no sounds of distress. Dorothy Reeves had simply vanished from her locked house, leaving behind her entire life. I called A.D. Chen in Phoenix. We've got a fourth disappearance, female, 73, vanished from her home in Mesa Hollow sometime last night. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. From her home? Not from the highway? From her home. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of foul play. Same pattern as the others. Hartley, what the hell is going on up there? I don't know, sir, but I think we need more resources. I need a forensics team, maybe a behavioral analysis unit consult. And I need someone from the tech division who can analyze some unusual acoustic phenomena I've been documenting. Another pause. Acoustic phenomena? I chose my words carefully. There are sounds in this area, sir. Unexplained sounds that seem to correlate with the disappearances. I don't know if they're relevant, but I think they warrant investigation. All right. I'll see what I can do. In the meantime, be careful up there, Hartley. 4 disappearances in 8 months is beyond coincidence. If there's someone targeting people in that area, you could be next. After hanging up, I returned to the Desert Rose Motel. Without Dorothy to run it, the place felt abandoned, despite the half-dozen cars in the parking lot belonging to guests. I used my FBI credentials to access the motel office and spent the next few hours going through Dorothy's records. The guest register went back 5 years, a handwritten log of every person who'd stayed at the Desert Rose. I cross-referenced the dates of the disappearances with the register, looking for any names that appeared multiple times, any pattern that might suggest a regular visitor to the area. Nothing stood out. Most guests stayed 1 or 2 nights, passing through on their way to somewhere else. A few regulars, mostly salespeople or contractors working on projects in the region, but none of their visits coincided with the disappearances. I was about to give up when I noticed something odd about the entries from the past 6 months. There were gaps, periods of several days where no guests had checked in. That seemed unusual for even a small motel in a remote location. Curious, I checked the corresponding dates against Dorothy's financial records, which I'd obtained with a warrant. The motel had been operating at a loss for the past year. Income from room rentals had dropped significantly, and Dorothy had been supplementing the motel's operating expenses with her own savings. I found that sad, but not particularly relevant to the investigation. Then I noticed the pattern. The gaps in the guest register, the periods when no one had checked in, all corresponded with nights when the moon was near its new phase. Dark nights, when the desert would be at its most black. I pulled up a lunar calendar on my laptop and checked it against the dates of the disappearances. James Whitfield, November 19th, 2 days before a new moon. Daniel Tsosi, February 14th, 3 days after a new moon. Sarah Navarro, June 22nd, the night of a new moon, and Dorothy Reeves had disappeared last night. June 26th, still within the dark moon phase. It could be coincidence. But I'd been an agent long enough to know that when coincidences started piling up, they usually weren't coincidences at all. That evening, I met with Sheriff Beckman and shared my findings. We were in his office, the overhead fluorescent lights humming, moths batting against the window screens. "So you're thinking what?" Beckman said. "Someone who only operates during the dark of the moon? Like a werewolf or something?" He said it with a slight smile, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm thinking that whoever or whatever is responsible for these disappearances prefers darkness, complete darkness. Out here, during a new moon, you can't see your hand in front of your face. But Dorothy disappeared from her house in town. There are street lights, porch lights. It's not completely dark. No, but it's darker than it would be with a full moon." I hesitated, then decided to share what I'd been thinking. "Sheriff, I need to tell you something about last night. I drove out to the location where Sarah Navarro disappeared. I wanted to see the area at night to get a feel for it." Beckman's expression became more alert. "And?" "I experienced something. I'm not sure how to describe it, and I'm not sure it will make it into my official report. But I heard those sounds, the rhythmic drumming or heartbeat, and I saw something, a distortion in the air, like heat shimmer but at night. It was circular, maybe 10 feet across, about 50 feet from where I was standing." "What did you do?" "I started walking toward it. Then my car door, which I'd left open, slammed shut on its own. When I turned back to look at the distortion, it was gone." Beckman was quiet for a long moment. "Do you believe in the supernatural, Agent Hartley?" "No. I believe in evidence, in facts, in things that can be measured and tested. But I also believe in acknowledging when something doesn't fit the known parameters. What I saw last night doesn't fit. Joseph Benally, the kid who works at the Chevron station, his grandmother wants to talk to you. I mentioned your name to Joseph this afternoon, and he called me a few hours ago. Said his grandmother has information about the mesas, about the disappearances. Old information, stories that have been passed down. I'll talk to her. At this point, I'll take information from any source." We drove to the Benally home just as the sun was setting. It was a small ranch house about 5 miles outside Mesa Hollow, surrounded by desert and a few struggling cottonwood trees. Joseph met us at the door, a serious expression on his young face. "My grandmother doesn't speak much English," he said. "I'll translate for you." The interior of the house was modest but immaculate. Navajo rugs hung on the walls, and the smell of fry bread lingered in the air. Joseph's grandmother sat in a recliner near the window, a tiny woman with long gray hair and eyes that seemed to look through you rather than at you. Joseph spoke to her in Navajo, a flowing musical language I didn't understand. She listened, then began to speak, her voice soft but steady. Joseph translated. "She says the disappearances have happened before. Not often, but they've happened. Her grandmother told her stories, and her grandmother's grandmother before that. Every few generations, the mesas take people, usually during the dark moon, usually at night. Why?" I asked. "What causes it?" More conversation in Navajo. The old woman's expression became grave. "She says there are places in the world where the boundaries are thin, where this world and the other world touch. The mesas are one of those places. During the dark moon, when the veil is thinnest, sometimes people cross over without meaning to. They're not killed or kidnapped, they just slip through to the other side." I felt a chill, despite the warm evening. "The other side of what?" The old woman spoke directly to me this time, and though I didn't understand the words, I understood the tone. Warning. Sadness. Joseph translated. She says not to go out to the mesas during the dark moon, not to look for the missing people. They're not in this world anymore, and trying to follow them will only result in more disappearances. She says the FBI, the government, the modern world, they don't understand that there are things older than science, things that can't be explained or controlled. I leaned forward. With respect to your grandmother, I can't just accept that 4 people have vanished into another dimension. There has to be a rational explanation. More Navajo, faster this time. The old woman's eyes flashed with something like frustration. She says the rational explanation is that the mesas have always been here, long before humans, and they'll be here long after we're gone. She says some places in the desert are sacred, but not all sacred places are safe. The mesas are a doorway, and doorways go both ways. Sometimes things come through from the other side, and sometimes people go through from this side. That's the way it's always been. Has anyone ever come back? A long pause. The old woman spoke quietly, sadly. One person, a long time ago. A young man who disappeared during a dark moon and returned 3 days later. But he wasn't the same. He couldn't speak, couldn't remember his name or his family. He died a week later. Whatever he saw on the other side, it broke something in him that couldn't be fixed. We left the Benally home as full darkness fell. The stars were beginning to emerge, brilliant pinpoints in the black sky. I felt deeply unsettled, torn between my training and what I was hearing, what I'd experienced. "Do you believe her?" I asked Beckman as we drove back toward town. He kept his eyes on the road. "I believe that she believes it, and I believe that people have been disappearing from this area for a very long time. Whether that's because of interdimensional doorways, or because there's a serial killer who's very good at disposing of bodies, I don't know. But something is happening here, and it's not normal." Over the next 3 days, a forensics team arrived from Phoenix. They swept Dorothy's house, finding nothing. They analyzed the vehicles that had been an impound, finding nothing. They took soil samples from the locations where the disappearances occurred, finding nothing unusual in the composition. The tech specialist I'd requested, a woman named Dr. Patricia Lynn, set up equipment to monitor the acoustic phenomena. We positioned sensors at various points around Mesa Hollow and at the locations of the disappearances. For 2 nights, we recorded nothing but normal desert sounds: wind, the occasional coyote, the hum of insects. On the 3rd night, at 11:47 p.m., the sensors picked up the sound. Dr. Lynn and I were in the sheriff's office, monitoring the equipment remotely. The waveform that appeared on her laptop screen was unlike anything I'd seen before. "That's not wind," she said, adjusting her glasses and leaning closer to the screen. "It's not machinery, not animal sounds, not geological activity. The frequency is too regular, too consistent. It's almost like a broadcast signal, but I've never seen anything quite like it." "Where's it coming from?" She pulled up a mapping program that showed the location of our sensors. All of them are picking it up, but it's strongest at the sensors positioned nearest to the mesas. And look at this. She pointed to the waveform. It's pulsing at exactly 140 beats per minute. That's not random. That's a specific frequency. Is there any significance to that number? Not that I know of, but I can tell you this. Whatever is generating this sound, it's putting out a tremendous amount of energy. If this were a speaker or a machine, it would have to be massive. The sound continued for 18 minutes, then stopped abruptly. Dr. Lynn and I sat in silence, staring at the flat line where the waveform had been. "I need to go out there," I said. "Agent Hartley, I don't think that's a good idea. We don't know what's causing this. And given the pattern of disappearances, I know." but I can't solve this case sitting in an office. Whatever is happening at those mesas, I need to see it firsthand. Then, at least take backup. Take the sheriff with you." But I didn't take Beckman. What I was planning was against protocol, possibly career-ending if it went wrong. I didn't want to drag him down with me. At 1 a.m., I drove out to the location where Sarah Navarro had disappeared. I parked my car on the shoulder, exactly where hers had been, and killed the engine. The night was moonless, perfectly dark except for the stars. I sat for a moment, listening to my own breathing, feeling my heart beat in my chest. Then I got out of the car and walked into the desert, counting my steps. 20 paces, the same distance Sarah's footprints had traveled before disappearing. The sound started almost immediately. That rhythmic pulse, exactly 140 beats per minute, rising from the darkness like something alive. I stood still, forcing myself to breathe normally, to observe rather than react. The air began to change. I felt it before I saw it. A tingling sensation on my skin, like static electricity. Then the shimmer appeared, that same circular distortion I'd seen before, but clearer now, more defined. It wasn't a trick of the light because there was no light. It was something else, a place where the darkness was different, where reality seemed to flex and bend. I took my phone from my pocket and tried to take a photo. The screen flickered, then went dead. The phone was completely unresponsive, as if all its circuits had simply stopped working. The shimmer grew more pronounced. Through it, or beyond it, I thought I could see something. Not clearly, just impressions. Shapes that might be rocks or buildings. Light that wasn't quite light. Movement that could be wind, or could be something else entirely. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get back in the car and drive away. But I'd come this far. I needed to understand. I took a step toward the shimmer. The sound changed, becoming higher, more intense. The shimmer seemed to reach toward me, or maybe I was being pulled toward it. The sensation was disorienting, like the ground beneath my feet wasn't quite solid anymore. I took another step. Something grabbed my arm. I spun around, my hand going to my weapon, and found myself face to face with Sheriff Beckman. He was shouting something, but I couldn't hear him over the sound. He pulled me backward, away from the shimmer, his grip iron tight on my arm. The sound reached a crescendo, a frequency so high it was almost painful. The shimmer collapsed in on itself, disappearing in an instant, and the silence that followed was absolute. Beckman didn't let go of my arm until we were back at the cars. He was breathing hard, his face pale in the starlight. "What the hell were you thinking?" he shouted. "You were about to walk right into it." I was shaking, adrenaline flooding my system. "How did you know I was here?" "Dr. Lynn called me. Said you'd taken off on your own and she was worried. I got here just in time to see you walking toward that thing like you were in a trance." "I wasn't in a trance. I knew exactly what I was doing." "Did you?" Because from where I was standing, it looked like that thing had you. I didn't have an answer for that. Had I been in control, or had the shimmer been pulling me in? I honestly didn't know. We drove back to town in separate vehicles. By the time I reached the motel, I was exhausted, my mind struggling to process what I'd experienced. I'd come close to disappearing, close to becoming the fifth victim in a pattern I still didn't understand. In my room, I tried to turn on my phone. It remained dead, a useless piece of plastic and metal. Whatever had been in that shimmer, it had fried every electronic component in the device. I lay awake until dawn, listening to the desert silence, wondering how I was going to explain any of this in a report that wouldn't get me committed for a psychological evaluation. The next morning brought news that made everything worse. Sheriff Beckman called at 7 a.m. "We've got another one. Local rancher named Martin Phelps. His wife called it in 20 minutes ago. Martin went out to check on some cattle around midnight and never came back. She found his truck about a mile from their ranch house, driver's door open, engine running. No Martin. The mesas? Not directly, but the ranch is about 2 miles west of the mesas. Close enough. 5 disappearances in 8 months. The pattern was accelerating. The forensics team processed Martin Phelps' truck with the same thoroughness they'd applied to every previous scene, and with the same result. Nothing. No fingerprints that shouldn't be there, no trace evidence, no signs of struggle. Just an abandoned vehicle, and a man who'd ceased to exist. I interviewed Martin's wife, Elena, at their ranch house. She was in her early 60s, weathered from decades of desert life. Her hands strong from years of ranch work. She sat at her kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold between her hands, and told me what had happened. Martin always checks the cattle before bed, she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. We've been losing calves to coyotes, so he's been extra vigilant. Last night, he went out around 11:30, said he'd be back in 20 minutes. When he wasn't back by midnight, I started to worry. When he wasn't back by 12:30, I went looking. Did he take anything with him? A weapon? A flashlight? His rifle was in the truck, along with his spotlight. But both were untouched when I found the truck. The spotlight was still in its holder, the rifle still in the rack behind the seat. Mrs. Phelps, had your husband mentioned seeing or hearing anything unusual lately? Any problems with trespassers? Any strange occurrences on your property? She hesitated, then nodded slowly. About a week ago, some of our cattle were acting strange. Bunched up in the corner of the north pasture. The one closest to the mesas, all facing the same direction like they were watching something. Martin went out there to see what had them spooked, but he couldn't find anything. No predators, no broken fence, nothing. Which direction were they facing? East, toward the mesas. After leaving the Phelps ranch, I met with Beckman and Dr. Lynn at the sheriff's office. The acoustic data from the previous night showed that the sound had occurred again, lasting from 11:45 p.m. until 12:13 a.m. 28 minutes this time, 10 minutes longer than before. It's getting stronger, Dr. Lynn said, pulling up the waveform analysis on her laptop. The amplitude is increasing with each occurrence. Whatever is generating this sound, it's becoming more active. I studied the data, looking for any pattern I might have missed. The duration is increasing, but is there any consistency to when it occurs? Always at night, always during the dark moon phase. But within those parameters, it seems random. No specific time, no specific trigger that I can identify. Beckman leaned against his desk, arms crossed. We've got 5 people missing in 8 months. The first 3 were spread out, 1 every couple of months. But Dorothy vanished 5 days ago, and now Martin. It's accelerating. I knew he was right. Whatever was happening, it was building toward something. I could feel it, the same way you can feel a storm building on the horizon. Sheriff, I need you to help me with something. I need a detailed timeline of every disappearance, cross-referenced with the lunar calendar, the acoustic events, and any other unusual occurrences in the area. Weather anomalies, power outages, anything that might seem related. We spent the next several hours building the timeline on a large whiteboard in the conference room. By the time we finished, a pattern had emerged that made my blood run cold. The acoustic events hadn't started 8 months ago with James Whitfield's disappearance. According to Dorothy's notes in the motel records and interviews with longtime residents, the sounds had been occurring for at least 3 years, but they'd been infrequent, maybe once every few months, and brief, never lasting more than 5 or 10 minutes. Then, 8 months ago, they'd started increasing in frequency and duration. The first disappearance occurred 2 weeks after the sounds began happening multiple times per week. Each subsequent disappearance had occurred during a period of intensified acoustic activity. "It's like whatever is causing this is getting stronger," I said, studying the timeline. "Learning, maybe. Or being drawn here by something." Dr. Lynn had been quiet, but now she spoke up. "Agent Hartley, I've been thinking about the waveform pattern. The frequency of 140 beats per minute, it's not random. That's roughly the human heart rate during moderate physical activity. And the overall pattern, the way it pulses and cycles, it reminds me of something biological rather than mechanical." "You think it's alive?" "I think it might be. Or it might be responding to something alive. There's research on how certain geological formations can generate infrasound, frequencies below the range of human hearing. These sounds can cause feelings of unease, hallucinations, even physiological effects. But what we're recording is in the audible range, and the pattern is too organized to be purely geological." Beckman's phone rang. He answered it, listened for a moment, then his face went pale. "I'll be right there." He hung up and looked at me. "There's been an incident at the Chevron station. Joseph Benally is missing. His supervisor found the store open, lights on, register empty, and no Joseph." We raced to the gas station. Joseph's supervisor, a middle-aged man named Frank Carlson, was waiting outside, visibly shaken. "I got here for the morning shift at 6 a.m. Door was unlocked, lights on, but no Joseph. The register is wide open, but the money's still there. His car is still in the parking lot. I called his cell phone, no answer." Inside, everything appeared normal except for the open register. A half-drunk energy drink sat on the counter next to the computer. The security monitor showed 4 camera views: the pumps, the front door, the counter, and the storage room. All feeds were live and functioning. "Does the system record?" I asked. "Yeah. Keeps 72 hours of footage." Frank moved to the computer and began pulling up the recordings. "What time do you want to see?" "Start at midnight. Fast forward until we see something." We watched the sped-up footage. Joseph had been working the night shift, dealing with occasional customers, mostly truckers stopping for diesel and coffee. At 1:14 a.m., a beat-up pickup truck pulled up to the pumps. A man got out, filled his tank, and came inside to pay. Joseph processed the transaction, and the man left. Nothing unusual. At 2:37 a.m., Joseph stepped outside for what looked like a smoke break. We watched him stand near the front door, looking out at the desert. After a few minutes, he stubbed out his cigarette and went back inside. At 3:51 a.m., the lights flickered. All 4 camera feeds showed static for approximately 10 seconds, then cleared. When the image stabilized, Joseph was gone. The store was empty. The register was open. Nothing else had changed. "Go back," I said. "Play it at normal speed." Frank rewound to 3:50 a.m. We watched Joseph behind the counter wiping down the surface, occasionally glancing at his phone. At 3:51 and 17 seconds, the lights flickered. Static filled the screens. When the image cleared at 3:51 and 27 seconds, Joseph had vanished. 10 seconds. In 10 seconds, a young man had disappeared from a locked gas station, leaving behind his car, his phone, his life. "Frank, during those 10 seconds of static, was there any sound?" I asked. "I don't know. The security system doesn't record audio." Dr. Lynn had arrived and was examining the equipment. The static could be caused by electromagnetic interference, something generating a strong enough field to disrupt the camera feeds, something like what we've been recording. Possibly, if the acoustic phenomena we've been monitoring is accompanied by electromagnetic activity, it could explain the interference. I looked at the frozen image of the empty store. 6 people now. 6 people in 8 months, and the rate was increasing. We were running out of time to stop whatever was happening. That afternoon, I made a decision that would either solve the case or end my career. I called A.D. Chen in Phoenix. "Sir, I need to request additional resources. I need a team, at least a dozen agents, technical support, and permission to establish a command center in Mesa Hollow, Hartley, for 6 missing persons. Sir, this isn't a typical missing persons case. There's something happening here that I can't fully explain, but it's real and it's dangerous. The disappearances are accelerating. We had one yesterday, another this morning. If this pattern continues, we could be looking at multiple disappearances per day within a week." There was a long pause. "What aren't you telling me, Agent Hartley?" I chose my words carefully. There are anomalous phenomena occurring in this area. Acoustic disturbances, electromagnetic interference, and patterns that suggest something beyond normal criminal activity. I don't know if we're dealing with a person, a group, or something else entirely. But I know that people are vanishing, and I know that whatever is taking them is getting stronger. Another pause, longer this time. "I'll send Agent Morrison and a small team. But Hartley, if this turns out to be nothing, if you're chasing ghosts in the desert, it's going to reflect very poorly on your record." "I understand, sir." The team arrived the next evening. Agent David Morrison was an old friend from Quantico, a solid investigator with 15 years of experience. He brought 4 other agents and a mobile command unit that we set up in the parking lot of the Desert Rose Motel. I briefed the team on everything we'd discovered, showing them the timeline, the acoustic data, the security footage from the Chevron station. I could see the skepticism in their faces, but to their credit, they listened without interruption. When I finished, Morrison spoke first. "So you're thinking what? Some kind of natural phenomenon that's causing hallucinations, making people wander off into the desert?" "I don't know what I'm thinking, but I know 6 people have vanished, and I know there's a pattern to the disappearances that correlates with measurable acoustic and electromagnetic events." One of the other agents, a woman named Sarah Chen, raised her hand. "What about the possibility of a cult? Some group operating in the area, targeting travelers and isolated individuals?" I'd considered that possibility, but it didn't fit. A cult couldn't cause the electromagnetic interference, couldn't generate the acoustic phenomena we've been recording. And the disappearances are too clean. No witnesses, no mistakes, no evidence left behind. Even the most sophisticated criminal organization would slip up eventually. We spent the next 2 days conducting intensive surveillance of the area around the mesas. We set up cameras, motion sensors, and additional acoustic monitoring equipment. We interviewed every resident of Mesa Hollow, cataloging everyone who'd seen or heard anything unusual in the past year. The picture that emerged was disturbing. Nearly everyone in town had experienced something they couldn't explain. Sounds in the night, feelings of being watched, electronics malfunctioning for no reason. Most had dismissed these occurrences as typical desert phenomena, the kind of strange experiences you get used to when living in isolation. But 2 residents, both longtime Mesa Hollow inhabitants, shared stories that made me pay attention. The first was Earl Hutchins, a retired mechanic in his 70s who'd lived in Mesa Hollow for 45 years. He told me about a night in 1982 when he'd seen lights in the desert near the mesas. Not headlights or flashlights, but a soft, pulsing glow that seemed to emanate from the ground itself. "I thought it was some kind of military exercise," he said. "You know, testing some new equipment." But I asked around, and nobody from the base up in Flagstaff knew anything about it. The lights showed up for about a week, always at night, always in the same spot. Then they stopped and didn't come back for years. When did they come back? About 3 years ago. I saw them again, same spot, same pulsing pattern. But this time, they lasted longer, showed up more often. I reported it to Tom Beckman, but what could he do? It wasn't hurting anybody, wasn't on anyone's property, just lights in the desert. The second resident was Margaret Torres, a teacher at the small elementary school in town. She'd lived in Mesa Hollow for 30 years and had her own strange experience to share. 5 years ago, my husband Daniel and I were driving back from Flagstaff late one night. This was before he passed away. We were on Route 160, maybe 3 miles east of town, when our car just died. Engine cut out, lights went dark, everything stopped. We coasted to the shoulder and Daniel tried to restart it, but nothing. The battery was completely dead, even though it was brand new. We were sitting there trying to figure out what to do when we heard that sound, like drums or a heartbeat, coming from the direction of the mesas. And then we saw it, a shimmer in the air like heat waves, but it was night and cold. The shimmer moved toward us, and I've never been so scared in my life. I told Daniel we needed to run, but he wanted to wait and see what it was. It got within maybe 50 feet of us, and then it just stopped. Hung there in the air for a few minutes, pulsing in time with that sound. Then it retreated back toward the mesas and disappeared. As soon as it was gone, our car started right up like nothing had happened. We drove home and never talked about it again. Why not? Because who would believe us? We didn't even believe it ourselves. We convinced ourselves it was some kind of atmospheric phenomenon, something natural that we just didn't understand. But I've never forgotten that feeling of fear, that certainty that we were close to something dangerous. That night, the entire team gathered in the command center to review our findings. We had more data than ever before, but we were no closer to understanding what was causing the disappearances. Morrison laid out the facts as we knew them. 6 missing persons, all adults, all in the same geographical area, all during the dark moon phase. No bodies, no witnesses, no evidence of foul play. Correlation with acoustic and electromagnetic phenomena that we can measure but can't explain. And multiple reports from residents of unusual experiences dating back years. "What's your recommendation?" I asked. He was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, I think we need to call in specialists, not just FBI tech support, but scientists, geologists, physicists, maybe even researchers who specialize in unusual phenomena. Because whatever this is, it's beyond normal investigative work." Before I could respond, the acoustic sensors went off. Dr. Lynn's laptop erupted with alerts, the waveform pattern appearing on screen. "It's starting," she said. "The sound, it's happening now." I looked at my watch. 9:42 p.m. Outside the command center windows, Mesa Hollow was settling into its usual quiet night. But somewhere out in the desert, something was waking up. "I'm going out there," I said. Morrison stood. "Not alone, you're not. We'll go as a team." We loaded into 3 vehicles, each equipped with cameras, recording equipment, and weapons we all hoped we wouldn't need to use. The plan was to position ourselves at 3 different locations: where Sarah Navarro's car had been found, where Martin Phelps' truck had been abandoned, and a point directly between the 2 mesas. I took the position between the mesas, along with Morrison and Sarah Chen. We parked our vehicle on a dirt access road and set up our equipment. The sound was clearly audible now, that rhythmic pulse that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "I'm getting readings," Chen said, watching her electromagnetic field detector. "The field strength is off the charts. Whatever's generating this, it's putting out massive amounts of energy." The shimmer appeared gradually, materializing about 200 yards ahead of us. Even Morrison, skeptical Morrison who'd probably never believed in anything he couldn't touch, saw it and went pale. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. "I don't know, but that's what I saw before." That's what I think is taking people. The shimmer grew larger, more defined. Through it or beyond it, I could see that same impression of shapes and movement. But this time, the images were clearer. I could make out what looked like structures, angular and precise, not quite like any architecture I'd seen before. And there were figures, humanoid shapes moving with purpose, going about tasks I couldn't comprehend. "Are you seeing this?" Jen asked, her voice shaking. "Yeah, camera recording." "Everything's recording. Jesus, Rebecca, what is that place?" "I don't know, but I think it's where the missing people went." As we watched, one of the figures in the shimmer seemed to notice us. It stopped moving and turned in our direction. Even at this distance, even through the distortion, I could feel its attention like a physical weight. Morrison reached for his service weapon. Should we? The figure moved toward the shimmer, toward our side of whatever barrier separated our reality from theirs. As it got closer, details became visible. It was roughly human-shaped, but wrong in ways I couldn't quite articulate. The proportions weren't right, the movements too fluid, too purposeful. Then the shimmer began to expand. "It's getting bigger," Chen said, backing toward our vehicle. "It's coming toward us." She was right. The circular distortion was growing, spreading across the desert floor like spilled water. And it was moving in our direction. "Everyone back in the vehicle," I ordered. "Now!" We scrambled into the SUV, Morrison behind the wheel. He turned the key. Nothing happened. "It's dead," he said, trying again. "The whole electrical system is dead." Through the windshield, we watched the shimmer advance. It was maybe 100 yards away now, close enough that I could see through it more clearly. The world on the other side was similar to ours, but different. The same desert, the same mesas, but the sky was wrong. Too dark, too empty, like looking into a void. And there were more figures now, dozens of them, all moving toward the shimmer, toward us. "Out of the vehicle," I said. "We run." We abandoned the SUV and ran back toward the main road. Behind us, I could hear the sound growing louder, more insistent, that 140 beat-per-minute pulse that now felt less like a heartbeat and more like a summons. I risked a glance back and saw the shimmer envelop our vehicle. For a moment, the SUV was visible through the distortion, and then it simply wasn't there anymore. Gone, as completely as the 6 missing people. We ran for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When we finally reached the main road, the sound stopped abruptly. The shimmer, visible in the distance, collapsed in on itself and vanished. Morrison was breathing hard, his face flushed. "Did that just happen? Did we just see our vehicle disappear into another dimension?" "I don't know what we saw," I said. "But yeah, I think that's exactly what happened." Sarah Chen was on her phone, but the screen was dark. "Dead. My phone's completely fried, just like yours was." We walked back to town in silence, each of us processing what we'd witnessed. When we reached the command center, the other team members were waiting with equally disturbing news. The agents positioned at the other locations had experienced the same phenomenon. Both teams had seen the shimmer. Both had watched it expand and advance toward them. Both had lost their vehicles when the equipment failed, and they'd been forced to flee on foot. Dr. Lin played back the audio recordings. All sensors had picked up the sound, but they'd also recorded something else, a secondary frequency just below the range of human hearing that corresponded with the expansion of the shimmer. "It's like a door opening," she said, studying the data. "The primary sound, the one we can hear, it's some kind of carrier wave. The infrasound beneath it, that's what's actually causing the phenomenon. It's generating a field that tears open a space between here and somewhere else." "Can we stop it?" Morrison asked. "I don't know. I don't even know what it is. This is beyond any technology I'm aware of. This is... She trailed off, shaking her head. Impossible, Chen finished. This is impossible. But it wasn't impossible. We'd all seen it. We'd all lost equipment to it. And 6 people had vanished into it. Probably 7 if you counted our missing SUV. I made the hardest call of my career that night. I contacted AD Chen and told him everything. The shimmer, the disappearances, the other world visible through the distortion. I expected him to think I'd lost my mind, to order me back to Phoenix for a psychological evaluation. Instead, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm going to make some calls. Don't do anything else until you hear from me." 3 hours later, I received a call from a blocked number. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and utterly devoid of identifying information. "Agent Hartley, you and your team need to leave Mesa Hollow immediately. Pack up your equipment, return to Phoenix, and file a report stating that the investigation is ongoing, but no conclusive evidence has been found. You will not discuss what you witnessed with anyone outside your immediate team. Is that understood? Who is this? That's not relevant. What's relevant is that you've stumbled into something that's being handled at a level far above your clearance. The disappearances in Mesa Hollow are not a law enforcement matter. They're a matter of national security, and they're being addressed by appropriate specialists. People are missing. 6 people that we know of. We can't just leave. You can, and you will. Your presence in Mesa Hollow is no longer helpful. In fact, it's become a liability. Leave tonight, Agent Hartley. That's not a request." The line went dead. I gathered the team and relayed the conversation. Morrison's face was grim. National security? What the hell does that mean? It means someone knows about this place. Someone's been monitoring it, studying it, and they don't want us interfering. So we just leave? Let more people disappear? We don't have a choice. We packed up the command center in silence. As we loaded equipment into the remaining vehicles, I saw Sheriff Beckman standing outside his office, watching us. I walked over to him. "You're leaving," he said. Not a question. "We've been ordered to. I can't tell you more than that. But the disappearances will continue. I'm sorry, Tom. I wish I had better news." He looked out toward the mesas, dark silhouettes against the star-filled sky. How long have they known? How long has the government known that this place exists, that it's taking people? I don't know, but I suspect a long time. And they're not going to do anything about it. I don't know what they're going to do, but I don't think it involves rescuing the missing people. Beckman nodded slowly. "You know what the Navajo people say about the mesas? They say some things are meant to be left alone. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. I never understood that until now." I shook his hand. "I'm sorry we couldn't help. You tried. That's more than most people would have done." We left Mesa Hollow at 3 a.m. In the rearview mirror, I watched the town disappear into the darkness. Somewhere out there, in the desert between the mesas, a doorway existed. A place where our reality touched something else, somewhere that didn't follow the rules we understood. And 6 people were on the other side, in a place we couldn't reach, facing a fate we couldn't imagine. The drive back to Phoenix was silent. Morrison drove, his hands tight on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the highway. Sarah Chen sat in the back, still reviewing data on a backup laptop that had been in the command center during the incident. I stared out the window at the desert rolling past, my mind trying to process everything we'd witnessed. We arrived at the Phoenix field office just as the sun was rising. AD Chen was waiting in his office, looking like he hadn't slept. With him were 2 people I didn't recognize. A man in his 50s wearing a suit with no identifying badges or insignia, and a woman about my age with cold eyes and an expression that suggested she was used to being obeyed. Agent Hartley, Agent Morrison, Agent Chen, my supervisor said. Please, sit down. We sat. The man in the suit spoke first. My name is not important. What's important is that you understand the situation you've found yourselves in. Mesa Hollow has been under observation by various government agencies for approximately 40 years. What you witness there is classified at a level that requires specialized clearance. You do not have that clearance. Then why tell us anything? I asked. The woman answered, because you've seen too much to be left completely in the dark. If we don't give you some context, you'll keep digging, keep asking questions. That would be problematic for everyone involved. 6 people are missing. 7, the woman interrupted. You're forgetting Joseph Benally's grandmother. She disappeared last night, walked out of her house around midnight, and hasn't been seen since. I felt my stomach drop. The old woman who'd warned me about the mesas, who'd shared her people's stories about the thin places in the desert. She was gone too. The man continued. The phenomenon at Mesa Hollow is what we call a confluence point, a location where our reality intersects with another. We don't fully understand the physics involved, though we have theories. What we do know is that these points exist in various locations around the world, and they've been documented throughout human history. You're talking about the shimmer, Morrison said. The distortion we saw. Yes. The shimmer, as you call it, is a visible manifestation of the intersection point. It appears to be cyclical, tied to lunar phases and other factors we're still studying. During certain periods, the boundary between our reality and the adjacent one becomes permeable. Things can pass through. Usually, it's just energy, information, sometimes small objects, but occasionally, during particularly strong manifestations, larger objects and even people can cross over. Sarah Chen leaned forward. Where do they go? What's on the other side? We don't know, the woman said. We've sent probes through when conditions allow. Most fail immediately, their electronics fried by whatever exists on the other side. The few that have transmitted back brief data suggest an environment similar to our own, but with fundamental differences in physical laws, different atmospheric composition, different electromagnetic properties, possibly even different temporal flow. You're telling me there's a parallel dimension, I said slowly, and it's been swallowing people in Mesa Hollow for years, and the government has just been watching it happen? Not just watching, the man said. We've been studying it, trying to understand it, and we've been managing it, keeping it contained, preventing widespread knowledge of its existence. Can you imagine what would happen if this information became public? The panic, the religious hysteria, the attempts by civilians to access the confluence point. Mesa Hollow would become a circus, and more people would disappear as they tried to investigate. So you just let people vanish. You don't even try to stop it. We've tried, the woman said, and for the first time, I heard something like emotion in her voice. We've tried barriers, electromagnetic countermeasures, even attempting to close the confluence point with explosives. Nothing works. The intersection exists independent of our actions. The best we can do is monitor it, document it, and try to understand it. A.D. Chen spoke for the first time. The Bureau has been aware of Mesa Hollow for 15 years. We provide local support, help manage the aftermath of disappearances, maintain the cover story. But we're not the lead agency on this. That responsibility belongs to a department you don't need to know about. What about the missing people? I asked. What about Dorothy Reeves and Sarah Navarro and all the others? Do they have families asking questions? They do, the woman said. And those families are told that their loved ones remain missing, that the investigation is ongoing. Some of them believe it, some don't. But what else can we tell them? That their family member walked through a hole in reality and might be alive in a place we can't reach. That would be cruel. So is lying to them. Perhaps, but it's a necessary cruelty. The meeting lasted another hour. They explained the protocol for our reports, the language we were required to use, the restrictions on our future careers. We would be reassigned immediately. Morrison was being sent to the Seattle office, Sarah Chen to Miami. I was staying in Phoenix but would be moved to white-collar crime, far away from anything involving unexplained phenomena. What you saw in Mesa Hollow stays between the people in this room, the man in the suit said. You will not discuss it with colleagues, with family, with anyone. You will not investigate it further. You will not return to the area. Violation of these terms will result in immediate termination and possible criminal charges under national security statutes. Am I clear? We all nodded. As we left the office, Morrison pulled me aside. You're not actually going to let this go, are you? I don't know what you mean, I said, very aware of the cameras in the hallway. Right, of course not. He lowered his voice. Be careful, Rebecca. These people, whoever they are, they're serious. They've been keeping this secret for decades. They won't hesitate to bury you if you become a problem. Over the next few weeks, I tried to settle into my new assignment. White-collar crime was interesting enough, tracking financial fraud and corporate malfeasance. But every night, I dreamed of the desert, of the shimmer, of the figures moving on the other side of reality. I couldn't let it go. Using my own time and my own money, I began researching confluence points. If Mesa Hollow was one of them, there had to be others. I searched through decades of unexplained disappearances, looking for patterns similar to what we'd found in Arizona. I found 12 possibilities. Locations scattered across the United States where people had vanished without explanation, where there were reports of strange sounds and lights, where the patterns matched Mesa Hollow almost exactly. A stretch of highway in Nevada, a state park in Vermont, a small town in Louisiana near the bayou. All of them in remote areas, all of them with histories of unexplained phenomena dating back generations. I compiled my findings into a document, carefully worded to avoid triggering any surveillance keywords. I didn't know who I could trust with this information, but I knew it needed to be preserved, documented, passed on to someone who might be able to do more than I could. 3 months after leaving Mesa Hollow, I received a package at my apartment. No return address, postmarked from Flagstaff. Inside was a single newspaper clipping from the Mesa Hollow Weekly Record, dated 2 weeks earlier. The headline read, "Local Sheriff Retires After 3 Decades of Service." The article was about Tom Beckman, announcing his retirement from law enforcement. But there was a note handwritten in the margin. They're still disappearing. 2 more last week. Nobody talks about it anymore. We just accept it now. TB. I felt a chill reading those words. Mesa Hollow had given up. The disappearances had become part of life there, an accepted risk of living near the mesas. And somewhere, in offices I would never see, bureaucrats were tracking the numbers, adding names to classified lists, maintaining their terrible secret. That night, I made a decision. I wrote down everything I knew about Mesa Hollow, about the confluence point, about the shimmer and what lay beyond it. I included the data Dr. Lin had collected, the testimony of witnesses, the timeline of disappearances. I made 3 copies, sealed them in waterproof containers, and hid them in 3 separate locations. Insurance, in case something happened to me. Evidence that the truth existed, even if it was buried under layers of classification and denial. A week later, I was called back to A.D. Chen's office. The woman from our previous meeting was there, the one with the cold eyes. "Agent Hartley," she said, "we've been monitoring your activity. Your research into other potential confluence points hasn't gone unnoticed." My mouth went dry. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't insult my intelligence. We have algorithms that flag certain search patterns, certain combinations of keywords. You've been looking for more locations like Mesa Hollow. I'm just doing my job, following up on cold cases. No, you're looking for answers to questions you're not cleared to ask." She leaned forward. "I'm going to be very clear with you, Agent Hartley. Your career with the FBI can continue, or it can end. The choice is yours. If you want it to continue, you will stop this investigation immediately. You will delete all your files, destroy any physical documents you've created, and never search for confluence points again. If you can't agree to those terms, then we have a problem." I met her gaze. "And if I refuse, then you'll find yourself facing charges that will end not just your career, but potentially your freedom. We have the authority and the resources to make that happen. Trust me, we've done it before." I thought about the documents I'd hidden, the insurance I'd created. I thought about the 7 people swallowed by Mesa Hollow, and the dozens, or possibly hundreds, who'd vanished at other confluence points over the years. "I understand," I said. "Good, I'm glad we could reach an agreement." But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I just became more careful. Over the next year, I built a network of contacts. Researchers, journalists, former government employees who'd worked on projects related to unexplained phenomena. I shared information cautiously, never revealing too much to any one person, always protecting my sources and my own involvement. I learned that the government had been aware of confluence points since at least the 1940s, possibly earlier. I learned that there were teams of scientists studying these locations, trying to understand the physics that made them possible. I learned that there had been attempts to use the confluence points, to send equipment and even people through intentionally, to explore what lay on the other side. Those experiments had ended badly. I also learned that the disappearances were getting worse. Not just at Mesa Hollow, but at other confluence points around the world. The frequency was increasing, the manifestations becoming stronger and more frequent. Some researchers believed the confluence points were spreading, that whatever process created them was accelerating. Others believed they'd always been there, always been active, and we were only now developing the technology to detect and measure them. Either way, the implications were terrifying. 2 years after Mesa Hollow, I was contacted by an anonymous source who claimed to have worked for the department that monitored confluence points. We met in a coffee shop in Tempe, far from bureau offices, far from anyone who might recognize me. He was in his 60s, gray-haired and tired-looking. "I worked at Mesa Hollow for 5 years," he said. "On site, observing the confluence point, collecting data. I know what you saw there. I know what you experienced. Why are you telling me this? Because someone needs to know the truth. The whole truth, not the sanitized version they gave you." He slid a flash drive across the table. "This contains documentation of every disappearance at Mesa Hollow going back to 1979, when we first started keeping detailed records. Over 200 people, Agent Hartley. 200 people who walked through that shimmer and never came back." 200? The number stunned me. But the official count is whatever they want it to be. Most of the disappearances were never reported to local authorities. People passing through, no one to miss them, no one to file reports. We documented them internally, but they never made it into any public record. Why are you giving me this? Because I'm dying, cancer. I've got maybe 6 months left and I don't want to take this secret to my grave. Someone needs to know. Someone needs to be able to tell the truth when the time comes. He stood to leave, then paused. One more thing. The confluence point at Mesa Hollow? It's not unique, and it's not the worst one. There's a location in Minnesota where the manifestations last for hours, not minutes. A place in Oregon where things come through from the other side, not just people going in. The government has built facilities around some of these points, trying to study them, trying to control them. But they can't. These things exist independent of us, independent of our technology and our understanding. All we can do is watch and document while they consume people. I took the flash drive. That night, I copied the contents and added them to my hidden documents. 200 names, 200 lives erased, reduced to entries in a classified database. The data showed something else too, a pattern I hadn't seen before. The disappearances weren't random. They clustered around certain dates, certain lunar phases. Yes, but also around geological events. Small earthquakes, fluctuations in the Earth's magnetic field, even solar activity. The confluence points were responding to forces we barely understood, opening and closing according to rules we couldn't predict. And they were getting more active. 3 years after Mesa Hollow, I was promoted. The irony wasn't lost on me. My work in white-collar crime had been exemplary, my cases successful, my conviction rate high. I was being groomed for leadership within the Bureau. But every night I still dreamed of the desert. I received occasional updates from contacts in the Mesa Hollow area. Tom Beckman had moved to Flagstaff after his retirement. The town itself was slowly dying, young people moving away, businesses closing. The disappearances continued, but they'd become part of the landscape, like flash floods or rattlesnakes, dangerous, accepted, unavoidable. 4 years after Mesa Hollow, I attended a law enforcement conference in Las Vegas. During a break between sessions, a man approached me in the hotel bar. He was young, early 30s, with the bearing of someone military or former military. "Agent Hartley, my name is Captain James Rodriguez, U.S. Air Force. I wonder if we could talk privately." We found a quiet corner of the lobby. He ordered a drink he didn't touch. "I'm stationed at Nellis Air Force Base," he said. "I work in a unit that monitors airspace anomalies, UFO reports, that kind of thing. Most of it's nothing, but sometimes we get reports that match certain parameters. Reports that get flagged for special attention." "What kind of parameters?" "Confluence points." He said it quietly, watching my reaction. "I know what happened to you in Mesa Hollow. I know you've been investigating other locations. I'm reaching out because I think we might be able to help each other. I'm not investigating anything. I'm in white-collar crime now." "Right, and I'm just a pilot who looks at weather balloons." He leaned forward. "Agent Hartley, there are people in the military who are tired of the secrecy around these phenomena. We believe the public has a right to know, that the scientific community should have access to this information. But we can't act alone. We need documentation, witness testimony, evidence that can't be dismissed or classified away." "What are you proposing?" "An informal alliance. We share information, coordinate research, and when the time is right, we go public. Carefully, strategically, in a way that can't be ignored or covered up." I studied him carefully. This could be a trap, an attempt to identify and neutralize anyone still investigating confluence points. Or it could be genuine, a chance to actually do something meaningful. "I need to think about it," I said. "Of course. But don't think too long, things are accelerating. The confluence points are becoming more active, and more people are noticing. Eventually, something's going to happen that's too big to cover up. When that day comes, we need to be ready to tell the truth." He gave me a phone number and left. I sat in that hotel lobby for 2 hours. considering my options. I could walk away, accept the career I'd built, ignore the confluence points and the people they consumed. I could keep my head down, follow orders, and retire in 20 years with a pension and commendations. Or I could risk everything to pursue a truth that most people would never believe, that powerful organizations had spent decades hiding. In the end, it wasn't really a choice. 5 years after Mesa Hollow, I'm still with the FBI. I'm still assigned to white-collar crime. Officially, I have no connection to unexplained phenomena, no interest in confluence points or interdimensional doorways. But unofficially, I'm part of a network. Researchers, scientists, military personnel, even a few journalists. We share information, we document cases, we build an archive of evidence that can't be destroyed or classified away. The confluence points are spreading, not geographically, but temporally. The manifestations are lasting longer, occurring more frequently. At Mesa Hollow, the shimmer now appears multiple times per week instead of once per month. The town has been virtually abandoned, most residents moving away, unable to live with the constant fear of disappearing. 7 more people have vanished from Mesa Hollow in the past year. But now there are cameras, independent observers, documentation that exists outside government control. The secret is getting harder to keep. I don't know what will happen when it finally breaks, when the truth about confluence points becomes public knowledge. Maybe chaos, maybe acceptance, maybe a fundamental shift in how we understand reality and our place in it. But I know this: the people who disappeared deserve to be remembered. Dorothy Reeves, Sarah Navarro, Daniel Tsosi, James Whitfield, Martin Phelps, Joseph Benally, his grandmother, and the hundreds of others whose names fill classified databases. They crossed over into somewhere we can't follow, faced something we can't comprehend. They deserve more than to be statistics in a hidden file, more than to be forgotten in the name of national security. This is my testimony. My documentation of what I saw in Mesa Hollow, what I know about confluence points, what the government has been hiding for decades. I've made copies, distributed them to people who will preserve this information even if something happens to me. The truth is out there, literally. In the desert between 2 ancient mesas, a doorway exists to somewhere else. It opens and closes according to patterns we don't understand, consuming anyone unlucky enough to be nearby when the boundary becomes permeable. The government knows. They've known for decades. They watch, they document, they manage the secret. But they can't stop it. No one can. All we can do is bear witness, remember the missing, and hope that someday we'll understand enough to bring them home. Until then, I'll keep investigating. I'll keep documenting. I'll keep fighting for the truth, even if it costs me everything. Because 7 people walked into the darkness between worlds, and someone needs to remember that they existed. Someone needs to keep searching for a way to bring them back. Even if it takes the rest of my life, even if it's impossible. I've investigated 43 homicides in my 22 years with the FBI, and I can usually tell within the first hour whether I'm dealing with something straightforward or something that's going to keep me up at night. When I got the call about Copper Ridge, Arizona on a Thursday morning in August 2020, I thought it would be straightforward. A small town, population 800, 2 suspicious deaths in 3 days, probably domestic violence, maybe a murder-suicide. Nothing I hadn't seen before. I was wrong about that. My name is Special Agent Michael Torres, and what happened in Copper Ridge still doesn't make complete sense to me, even after everything I learned. But I'll tell you what I know, what I saw, and you can decide for yourself what it means. The call came from the Pinal County Sheriff's Office. Their deputy, a woman named Linda Marsh, had requested federal assistance after the second body turned up. The first death had looked like natural causes, maybe a heart attack or stroke, but when the second victim died in almost exactly the same way, the local coroner got suspicious and called it in. I drove down from Phoenix on a Friday morning, taking Highway 60 east through the desert. Copper Ridge sat about 90 miles outside the city, tucked into a valley between two mountain ranges that had been mined for copper back in the 1880s. The mines had played out by the 1920s, and the town had been slowly dying ever since. Most residents were retirees, people who'd lived there their whole lives and couldn't afford to leave, and a handful of artists and writers who'd been drawn by cheap real estate and desert solitude. The town itself looked like something from another era. A single main street with buildings that still had wooden facades and covered walkways. A general store, a post office, a diner called Mary's that seemed to be the social center of the community. At the end of the street sat the old Copper Ridge Hotel, a 3-story Victorian structure that had been converted into a museum and visitor center, though I doubted they got many visitors out here. The sheriff's substation was a small building on the edge of town, barely more than a double-wide trailer with official signage. Deputy Marsh met me at the door. She was in her early 40s, lean and weathered, with the kind of competence that comes from years of handling problems on your own. "Agent Torres, thanks for coming down," she said, shaking my hand with a firm grip. "I know 2 deaths might not seem like much to the Bureau, but there's something wrong here. I can feel it. Tell me about the victims." She led me inside to a small office crowded with filing cabinets and outdated computer equipment. On the desk were 2 manila folders, thin but neatly organized. First victim was Gerald Hoffman, 68 years old, retired accountant. Lived alone in a house on Mesquite Street. His neighbor found him 3 days ago, Wednesday morning. He was lying on his living room floor, eyes open, no visible injuries. The neighbor called me. I called the coroner. I opened the first folder. Crime scene photos showed an elderly man in casual clothes sprawled on a hardwood floor. His face was frozen in an expression that looked like terror or maybe pain, his mouth open, his eyes wide. But there were no signs of trauma, no blood, nothing that immediately explained his death. The coroner's initial assessment: heart attack, probably. Gerald had a history of cardiovascular problems, took medication for high blood pressure. But when Dr. Ellis, our coroner, did the preliminary examination, he found something odd. Gerald's pupils were massively dilated, and there were these tiny hemorrhages in his eyes. Dr. Ellis said it looked like Gerald had been terrified, like his heart had literally been scared to death. That's possible with certain conditions. Extreme shock, sudden fear, it can trigger cardiac events in people with underlying health issues. That's what we thought, until Marcus Webb died 2 days later. She opened the second folder. Marcus Webb, 53. A writer who'd moved to Copper Ridge 5 years ago to work on a novel. He'd been found in his home office, slumped over his desk, in almost the exact same condition as Gerald Hoffman. Same expression of terror, same dilated pupils, same tiny hemorrhages in the eyes. Marcus was healthy, Deputy Marsh continued. Ran 5 miles every morning, didn't smoke or drink, no history of heart problems. Dr. Ellis performed a more detailed examination this time. Ran a toxicology screen. No drugs, no poisons, nothing that would explain his death. But his stress hormones were through the roof, cortisol and adrenaline levels like someone who'd been in mortal danger for an extended period. I studied the photos carefully. Something about the victim's expressions bothered me. It wasn't just fear, it was something more specific. Recognition, maybe. Like they'd seen something they couldn't believe, something that violated their understanding of reality. Were the victims connected? Did they know each other? This is a small town, Agent Torres. Everyone knows everyone. But Gerald and Marcus weren't particularly close. Different age groups, different social circles. Gerald spent most of his time at the senior center playing cards. Marcus kept to himself mostly, writing. Any witnesses, anyone see or hear anything unusual around the times of death? That's the strange part. Both deaths occurred at night. Gerald's neighbor estimates he died sometime between 10 p.m. and midnight on Tuesday. Marcus's girlfriend found him Thursday morning, but based on body temperature and rigor mortis, Dr. Ellis thinks he died around the same time the night before, 10 to midnight Wednesday. I made notes. 2 deaths, 2 nights in a row, roughly the same time of night, same mysterious cause. Not enough for a pattern yet, but enough to be concerning. I'd like to see the crime scenes, talk to the coroner, and interview anyone who knew the victims well. We spent the rest of the day going through the motions of a standard investigation. I examined Gerald Hoffman's house first. It was a small, neat bungalow with the kind of furniture and decorations that accumulate over a lifetime. Family photos on the walls, a modest collection of books, a television tuned to a local news channel. The living room where Gerald had died showed no signs of forced entry, no indication of a struggle. Everything was in its place except for an overturned coffee cup on the side table, brown liquid stained into the carpet. Whatever had happened to Gerald, it had happened fast. He'd been sitting in his chair, drinking coffee, and then something had caused him to stand up, drop the cup, and collapse. Marcus Webb's house was different. He'd lived in a small ranch-style home on the outskirts of town, with a stunning view of the desert and mountains. His office was cluttered with papers, books, and research materials for his novel. What caught my attention was his computer. It was still on, the screen displaying a document with the last thing he'd written. I leaned closer to read it. I can hear them in the walls again. The scratching, the whispers. It's getting louder. They're getting closer. I know it's not real. I know it's not real. But God help me, I can see them now, in the corners, in the shadows. They're watching me. They've always been watching, since I came here. Since I started writing about them, they know I know, and they're coming. The timestamp showed he'd written those words at 9:47 p.m., less than an hour before his estimated time of death. I took screenshots and made a note to have the computer forensically examined. Then I called Deputy Marsh over. Did Marcus have any history of mental illness? Paranoia? Schizophrenia? Anything like that? Not that I know of. His girlfriend, Kelly Bryant, she might know more. I can take you to her. Kelly Bryant lived in town, above the general store that her family had owned for 3 generations. She was in her mid-30s, red-eyed from crying, still in shock from finding Marcus's body. We sat in her small apartment and I asked her about Marcus's mental state in the days before his death. He'd been stressed, she said, twisting a tissue in her hands. The novel wasn't going well. He'd been working on it for 3 years, and he was starting to think it would never be finished. But he wasn't crazy. He wasn't paranoid or hallucinating or anything like that. Had he mentioned hearing things? Seeing things? She hesitated. He said the house made noises at night. Old pipes, settling foundation, that kind of thing. He joked about it being haunted, but he didn't really believe that. Marcus was rational, scientific. He didn't believe in ghosts or supernatural stuff. What was his novel about? The history of Copper Ridge, the mining days, the people who lived here in the 1800s. He'd been doing a lot of research, going through old records at the museum, interviewing longtime residents. He was really interested in the mines, in what life was like for the miners and their families. I made a note. Had he been in the mines recently, gone down to explore? No, they're sealed off. have been for decades, too dangerous. But he talked about wanting to get permission to go in to see them firsthand for his research. After leaving Kelly, I met with Dr. Ellis, the county coroner. He was in his 70s, white-haired and methodically, with the careful manner of someone who'd seen too much death to be shocked by it anymore. His office was in the basement of the medical clinic, a small room that smelled of formaldehyde and air freshener. "Agent Torres," he said, gesturing to 2 body bags on examination tables. "I'm glad the Bureau is taking an interest. These deaths, they're not natural. I don't care what the initial reports said. Tell me what you found." He pulled back the sheet covering Gerald Hoffman's body. "Look at the face. That expression, it's not from a normal heart attack. I've seen hundreds of cardiac deaths and they don't look like this. This looks like he was being chased by something, like he died running from terror. Could it be a reaction to a toxin, something that causes extreme fear? I tested for everything I could think of. No scopolamine, no hallucinogens, no known poisons. The tox screen came back completely clean, but there's something else." He pointed to Gerald's hands. "Look at his fingernails. See the dirt under them, the small abrasions on the fingertips?" I looked closer. The nails were indeed dirty, and there were tiny scratches on the pads of his fingers. He was clawing at something. Yes, but what? There's nothing in his house that shows those kinds of marks. I checked the crime scene photos, looked at the walls, the floor, the furniture. Nothing. What about Marcus Webb? Dr. Ellis moved to the second body. Same thing. Same expression. Same dilated pupils. Same hemorrhages. And look at his hands. The younger man's fingers showed the same signs. Dirt under the nails. Small abrasions. And there's one more thing I found. Both men had traces of copper dust in their lungs. Not a lot, but enough to be measurable. Copper dust? From where? That's what I'd like to know. Neither of them worked in construction or manufacturing. Neither had any reason to be exposed to that much particulate copper. But it's there, in the tissue samples. I stood back, thinking. 2 men, different ages, different backgrounds, dying in the same mysterious way. Terror-stricken expressions, evidence of clawing at something, copper dust in their lungs, and Marcus's final words about hearing things in the walls, about being watched. "Dr. Ellis, is there anyone in town who knows about the history of the mines? Someone who might be able to tell me about working conditions, about what the air was like down there?" "You'd want to talk to Frank Delgado. He's 92, been in Copper Ridge his whole life. His grandfather worked in the mines before they closed. Frank knows more about the history of this town than anyone alive." I found Frank Delgado at the senior center, a converted church hall where a dozen elderly residents were playing cards and watching television. Frank was in a wheelchair by the window, reading a thick book about Arizona history. When I introduced myself and explained why I was there, his expression became grave. "Those boys," he said, his voice still strong despite his age. "Gerald and Marcus. I heard they died badly." "Yes, sir. I'm trying to understand why. I was told you might know something about the copper mines, about the old days." He closed his book and looked at me with thought on eyes that were still sharp. "What do you want to know?" "The victims had copper dust in their lungs. I'm wondering if there's some connection to the mines even though they've been closed for a long time." Frank was quiet for a moment, then wheeled himself toward a more private corner of the room. I followed. When we were away from the others, he spoke quietly. "The mines have been sealed for almost 100 years, Agent Torres, but that doesn't mean they're gone. This whole town, it's built on top of miles of tunnels. They run under the streets, under the buildings, under people's houses. Most folks don't think about it, don't remember. But the tunnels are still there, still connected to the surface through vents and old shafts that were never properly sealed. You think Copper dust could still be getting into the air from those tunnels. I think there's a lot of things down in those tunnels. Copper dust, sure, but other things too. Dangerous things. What kind of dangerous things? He looked at me carefully, measuring how much to say. My grandfather, he worked in the fortune mine from 1898 to 1915. He didn't talk much about those years, but when he got old, when his mind started to go, he'd tell stories. About things the miners saw down in the deep shafts. About sounds they heard that didn't make sense. About men who went down and didn't come back up the same. I felt a chill, despite the warm afternoon. What kind of things did they see? Shadows that moved on their own. Lights that appeared in tunnels that should have been pitch black. And worst of all, the pale ones. The pale ones. That's what the miners called them. Figures, human-shaped but not quite right, that appeared in the deepest parts of the mines. My grandfather said they looked like people who'd been underground too long, like the darkness had bleached them white. The miners were terrified of them, but the mine owners said it was just hallucinations from bad air, from breathing too much dust and gas. Did your grandfather believe that? He believed what he saw, and what he saw down there stayed with him until the day he died. The last thing he said to me, the day before he passed, was, "Don't go in the mines, Francisco. Don't ever go in the mines. They're still down there, waiting." I left the senior center with more questions than answers. Hallucinations from bad air, toxic gas, that could explain the terror, the bizarre behavior. But it didn't explain how two men who'd never been in the mines could have copper dust in their lungs. It didn't explain the timing of the deaths, the similarity in their conditions. That evening, I set up a temporary base of operations in my motel room at the Copper Ridge Motor Lodge, a rundown place at the edge of town. I spread out my notes, reviewed the crime scene photos, and tried to build a coherent theory. Theory 1. Environmental contamination. Old mine tunnels leaking toxic gas into the town, causing hallucinations and cardiac stress. But that didn't explain why only 2 people had been affected, why the deaths were at night, why they were confined to specific locations. Theory 2. Deliberate poisoning. Someone introducing a toxin that caused extreme fear and cardiac failure. But the tox screens were clean, and there was no obvious motive, no connection between the victims that suggested a targeted attack. Theory 3. Something I couldn't quite articulate yet. Something that had to do with the mines, with what Frank Delgado's grandfather had seen, with the pale ones, and the shadows, and the things that waited in the darkness. Around midnight, I stepped outside the motel for some air. The desert night was cool and quiet, stars brilliant in the black sky. Copper Ridge was dark, except for a few streetlights and the glow from occasional windows. Peaceful, ordinary, giving no hint of the deaths that had occurred. I was about to go back inside when I heard it. A sound, faint but distinct, coming from somewhere in the town. It was rhythmic, almost musical, like metal striking stone. Clink, clink, clink. The sound of mining, of pickaxes on rock. But the mines had been closed for 100 years. I stood listening for several minutes. The sound continued, steady and unchanging, echoing through the quiet streets. I tried to pinpoint its direction, but it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, carried by the night air and the strange acoustics of the valley. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was complete. I went back to my room and made a note. Unexplained sounds at night, possibly related to the sealed mines, possibly my imagination. But I knew it wasn't my imagination. The next morning, Saturday, I met with Deputy Marsh at Mary's Diner for breakfast. The place was busy with locals, the conversation subdued, everyone talking about Gerald and Marcus. Word had spread that an FBI agent was in town, and I could feel eyes on me as I walked to the booth where Linda was waiting. "Sleep well?" she asked as I sat down. "Well enough." Did you hear anything unusual last night? Around midnight? Like what? Sounds, mining sounds, metal on stone. Her expression changed. You heard it too. So, it's not just me. No, people have been hearing it for the past week or so. Nobody talks about it much because it sounds crazy. But yeah, there are sounds at night. Like someone's working in the mines. How long has this been happening? About 10 days. It started maybe a week before Gerald died. At first, people thought it was construction work, someone doing repairs or renovations. But there's no construction happening in town. A week of mysterious sounds, then 2 deaths. The pattern was becoming clearer, even if the explanation wasn't. After breakfast, I decided to visit the museum. If Marcus Webb had been researching the mines, maybe the staff there could tell me what he'd been looking for, what he'd found. The Copper Ridge Museum occupied the first floor of the old hotel. It was a dusty, dimly lit space filled with artifacts from the mining era. Display cases held tools, photographs, shishis, ore samples, and personal items from the miners who'd worked here more than a century ago. The walls were covered with maps showing the tunnel networks beneath the town. Incredibly complex systems that branched out in every direction, like the roots of a massive tree. The curator was a woman in her 60s named Margaret Howell, enthusiastic about the town's history, despite the museum's obvious lack of funding and visitors. When I told her I wanted to learn about the mines, her face lit up. Finally, someone interested in preservation. We've been trying to get grants to properly document and secure the old tunnel systems, but there's no money, no support. She led me to a large map on the wall. This is the Fortune Mine, the largest operation in the area. At its peak, it employed over 500 men and produced millions of pounds of copper ore. But the working conditions were terrible. Cave-ins, gas leaks, accidents. Dozens of men died down there. Marcus Webb was researching the mines before he died. Do you know what specifically he was interested in? Oh yes, Marcus was here almost every day for the past month. He was fascinated by the accidents, particularly the ones from 1912 to 1915. That was when the deepest shafts were being dug, going down almost 1,000 feet. There were a series of unexplained incidents during that period. Men disappearing, equipment found destroyed, reports of strange sightings. Sightings of what? She pulled out a ledger, old and fragile, filled with handwritten entries. The mine foreman kept detailed logs. Listen to this entry from September 1913. 3 men failed to return from Shaft 7. Search party found their tools, but no bodies, evidence of struggle. Men report seeing pale figures in the darkness. Morale low. Many workers refusing to go below level 4. I felt that chill again. What happened after that? The mine owners brought in additional workers, paid them more to work the deep shafts, but the incidents continued. More disappearances, more reports of the pale figures. Finally, in 1915, there was a major cave-in in Shaft 7. 32 men were killed. The mine owners decided it wasn't worth the risk and closed the deepest levels permanently. The mine kept operating at shallower depths for a few more years, but the copper was running out. By 1922, it was completely shut down. And Shaft 7? Sealed, filled with concrete and rubble. At least, that's what the records say. She pointed to the map. It's here, running under the eastern part of town. Under Mesquite Street, actually. Mesquite Street, where Gerald Hoffman had lived and died. What about Marcus? What was he trying to find out about these incidents? He believed there was a cover-up. He thought the mine owners had known about toxic gas in the deep shafts, that they'd kept sending men down despite knowing the danger. He wanted to prove it for his novel, to show that the deaths were preventable, that it was corporate greed that killed those men. Did he find proof? He was getting close. He'd been going through financial records, correspondence between the mine owners and the State Mining Commission. He'd found evidence that they knew about high concentrations of mercury vapor and other toxic gases in the lower levels, but kept it quiet to avoid regulations and inspections. Mercury vapor. That could cause hallucinations, neurological damage, psychological symptoms. That could explain some of what the miners had experienced. But it didn't explain the pale figures. It didn't explain the disappearances. It didn't explain what was happening now, 100 years after the mines had closed. "Mrs. Howell, has anyone been in those tunnels recently? Any explorers, urban spelunkers, anyone who might have reopened sealed areas?" "Not that I know of. The entrances are all sealed, and the tunnels are incredibly dangerous. Unstable, flooded in some sections, full of bad air. Going down there would be suicide." That afternoon, I requested a ground-penetrating radar survey of Copper Ridge, focusing on the area around Mesquite Street and Marcus Webb's house. If there were unsealed tunnels beneath the town, if gas was leaking up through vents and old shafts, the GPR would show it. The team from Phoenix arrived Sunday morning with their equipment. By noon, they'd confirmed what I suspected. The tunnel networks under Copper Ridge were extensive and largely intact. More concerning, they detected what appeared to be open spaces, voids in the ground that suggested the tunnels weren't completely filled or collapsed. And directly beneath Mesquite Street, right under where Gerald Hoffman's house stood, was a large cavity that matched the dimensions of Shaft 7. "The seal must have failed," the lead technician said, showing me the radar images. "Either natural erosion or maybe a minor earthquake. But there's definitely an open passage here, and look at this." He pointed to thermal imaging data. "There's air movement. Something is venting from below, coming up through cracks in the foundations of these old buildings. Air from the mines. Air that had been trapped underground for 100 years, full of copper dust and mercury vapor, and God knew what else. Air that was seeping into people's homes at night, causing hallucinations, causing terror, causing death. I had my explanation: environmental contamination from the old mines, toxic gas causing acute psychological distress and cardiac events. It made sense. It fit the evidence, but it didn't explain the sounds at night. It didn't explain the scratches on the victim's fingers, the way they'd clawed at something invisible. It didn't explain the feeling I'd had since arriving in Copper Ridge, the sense that something was watching, waiting. That night, at exactly midnight, the sounds started again. I was in my motel room when I heard it. That same rhythmic clink of metal on stone. But this time it was louder, closer, more insistent. I grabbed my flashlight and service weapon and stepped outside. The night was cold, the stars hidden behind clouds that had rolled in during the evening. The sound was coming from the direction of town. I got in my bureau vehicle and drove slowly down Main Street, following the noise. It grew louder as I approached Mesquite Street, the street where Gerald Hoffman had lived, the street that sat directly above Shaft 7. I parked and got out. The sound was definitely coming from underground, echoing up through storm drains and foundation vents. I could hear it clearly now, not just the clink of pickaxes but other sounds too. Creaking timbers, falling rock, the distant rumble of something heavy moving through confined spaces. A light came on in one of the houses, then another. Residents were waking up, hearing the sounds, coming to their windows to see what was happening. I saw Deputy Marsh's patrol car pull up behind mine. "It's getting worse," she said, joining me on the sidewalk. "It's never been this loud before." As we stood there, the sounds changed. The rhythmic clinking stopped, replaced by something else, scratching. Hundreds, maybe thousands of small scraping sounds like fingernails on stone, like something crawling through narrow spaces. What the hell is that? Linda whispered. Before I could answer, the scratching stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It felt expectant, like something was listening, waiting for us to move. Then, from a storm drain about 20 feet away, I saw something move. A pale shape, barely visible in the darkness, pressing up against the metal grate from below. I aimed my flashlight at it. For a split second, I saw a face. Human-shaped but wrong, the features elongated and distorted, the skin so pale it almost glowed in the beam of my light. Empty eye sockets, a mouth open in what might have been a scream or a warning. Then it was gone, pulling back into the darkness below. Linda had seen it too. Her hand was on her weapon, her breathing fast and shallow. "Michael, what was that?" "I don't know, but we need to get people out of their houses. If there's toxic gas coming up from those tunnels, if that's what's causing hallucinations." A scream cut through the night. It came from a house at the end of the street, a 2-story Victorian with peeling paint and a sagging porch. The front door was open, light spilling out. We ran toward it. Inside, we found an elderly woman in a nightgown, standing in the middle of her living room, pointing at the floor. "They're under the house," she said, her voice high and trembling. "I can hear them scratching. They're trying to get in." I could hear it too, that same scratching sound coming from beneath the floorboards. Linda was calling for backup on her radio, but I knelt down and pressed my ear to the floor. The scratching was real. It wasn't a hallucination, wasn't a gas-induced delusion. There was something down there in the crawl space, or in the tunnels beneath the house, and it was trying to get up. "Ma'am, what's your name?" I asked the woman. "Virginia Cass." "Virginia, I need you to get out of the house right now. Go to your neighbors, go anywhere else, but don't stay here." "I can't leave. This is my home. I've lived here for 40 years. The scratching grew louder. I could see the floorboards moving slightly, dust falling from between the cracks. Whatever was down there, it was getting closer. "Linda, get her out. I'm going to check the basement." "Michael, that's not safe. Just get her out." I found the basement stairs off the kitchen. The door was old and warped, and it took me a moment to force it open. The stairs led down into darkness, into a musty smell of earth and decay. I descended carefully, my flashlight in one hand, my weapon in the other. The basement was unfinished, just dirt floor and stone foundation walls. In the corner, I saw what I was looking for, a vent grate, rusted and old, that led down into deeper darkness. The scratching was coming from there, echoing up from whatever lay below. I approached the grate carefully. The scratching stopped. For a moment, there was only silence and the sound of my own breathing. Then I heard something else. A voice, faint and distant, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. I knelt beside the grate and shined my light down. The beam penetrated maybe 15 feet before being swallowed by darkness. But in that 15 feet, I saw the opening of a tunnel, rough-hewn rock walls, and something else. Movement. Pale shapes pulling back from the light, retreating into the depths. The voice spoke again, clearer this time. It sounded like it was coming from multiple sources, overlapping, creating a discordant harmony. "Go back. Leave us. The copper is ours. The darkness is ours. Leave us." I've been trained to handle a lot of situations. Active shooters, hostage crises, armed standoffs. But nothing in my training prepared me for this. For voices from beneath the earth. For pale figures that retreated from light. For the absolute certainty I felt that I was in the presence of something that shouldn't exist. I backed away from the grate and climbed the stairs as quickly as I could without running. Outside, Deputy Marsh had gotten Virginia Cass and several other residents gathered on the street, away from the houses. More lights were coming on. People were emerging from their homes, frightened and confused. I pulled Linda aside. "We need to evacuate this street. Maybe the whole town. There's something in those tunnels, and I don't think it's just gas. Michael, what did you see down there? I don't know, but I heard voices, and I saw movement. And whatever it is, it's not friendly. Over the next few hours, we managed to evacuate most of Mesquite Street. Some residents went to stay with friends or family elsewhere in town. Others checked into the motor lodge or left Copper Ridge entirely. By dawn, the street was nearly empty. The scratching sounds had stopped around 3 a.m., fading gradually until there was only silence. But the damage was done. The entire town was awake, frightened, demanding answers I didn't have. I called my supervisor in Phoenix at 7 a.m. "Sir, I need additional resources. This isn't just a homicide investigation anymore. We're dealing with some kind of contamination event, possibly toxic gas from old mine tunnels, but there are complications." "What kind of complications?" "Unexplained phenomena. Sounds, sightings, possible mass hysteria. I need a hazmat team, environmental specialists, and probably someone from the CDC." There was a long pause. "Torres, are you telling me this is a public health crisis?" "I'm telling you that 2 people are dead under mysterious circumstances. An entire street is experiencing the same hallucinations, and there's evidence of environmental contamination from sealed mines." "Yes, sir. I think it qualifies as a public health crisis." "I'll make the calls. In the meantime, contain the situation. Don't let anyone else die." The hazmat team arrived by noon. Men and women in protective suits with air monitoring equipment and gas detectors. They set up a perimeter around Mesquite Street and began testing the air for toxic compounds. The results came back within hours. Elevated levels of mercury vapor, copper particulates, sulfur dioxide, and several other compounds associated with mining operations. Enough to cause respiratory irritation and possibly neurological symptoms, but not enough to cause the kind of acute terror and cardiac events we'd seen in Gerald and Marcus. "There's something else here," the team leader said, showing me the readings. "We're picking up electromagnetic anomalies. Fluctuations in the ambient field that don't match anything natural. It's almost like there's a power source beneath the street, something generating a field. Could that cause hallucinations, psychological effects? Possibly. There's research showing that strong electromagnetic fields can affect brain function, cause feelings of unease, even create the sensation of being watched or the perception of ghostly figures. But the field strength we're measuring shouldn't be enough to cause those effects." I spent the afternoon interviewing more residents, trying to build a timeline of when the disturbances had started. What I found was disturbing. The sounds had begun about 2 weeks ago, faint at first, but growing gradually louder. Several residents reported seeing strange shadows at night, feeling watched, experiencing vivid nightmares about being underground. And there were more victims I hadn't known about. Not deaths, but illnesses. 3 people had been hospitalized in the past week with severe anxiety, panic attacks, and symptoms that looked like acute stress disorder. All 3 lived on or near Mesquite Street. I visited them at the small clinic in town. They were heavily sedated, but when I spoke with their doctor, she confirmed that all 3 had described similar experiences before their breakdowns. Hearing voices, seeing pale figures, feeling like they were being watched from below. "I thought it was stress," the doctor said. "Copper Ridge has been in decline for years. Economic hardship, isolation, it takes a toll on mental health. But 3 cases in 1 week, all with the same symptoms. That's not normal." That evening, I returned to the museum to review more of the old mine records. Margaret Howell stayed late to help me, pulling out boxes of documents that hadn't been properly cataloged or studied. In a ledger from 1914, I found something that made my blood run cold. A medical log kept by the mine doctor describing symptoms experienced by workers in the deep shafts. Auditory hallucinations, visual distortions, feelings of paranoia and persecution, violent nightmares, unexplained terror. The symptoms matched exactly what was happening now. But the most disturbing entries came from the final months before the mine closed. The doctor had recorded several cases of workers who'd experienced what he called extreme dissociative episodes. Men who claimed they'd seen their coworkers transform into pale, elongated figures. Men who insisted they'd heard voices in languages they didn't recognize. Men who became convinced that something was alive in the deepest parts of the mine, something that didn't want humans there. One entry stood out. Patient claims to have seen the ones who were here first. States they are not spirits or hallucinations, but something else, something that has always been in the earth. Patient refuses to return to work. Recommend termination of employment. I photographed the page and sent it to a colleague at the Bureau who specialized in historical research. Within an hour, she'd found similar accounts from other mining operations around the world. Cornish tin mines in the 1800s, South African gold mines in the early 1900s, Chilean copper mines in the 1950s. Always the same pattern. Deep shafts, unexplained phenomena, workers seeing pale figures, hearing voices, experiencing terror that couldn't be explained by known hazards. The miners had a name for these entities in different cultures. Knockers in Cornwall, Tommyknockers in American mines, duendes in South American operations. Folklore treated them as spirits or fairies, but the descriptions were always similar. Human-shaped, but wrong. Living in the deepest parts of the earth. Hostile to intrusion. I'd always dismissed such folklore as superstition, as explanations primitive people created for things they didn't understand. But now, sitting in that quiet museum as night fell over Copper Ridge, I wasn't so sure. Around midnight, I heard the sounds start again. But this time, they weren't coming from underground. They were coming from the street outside the museum. I looked out the window and saw them. Dozens of pale figures moving through the darkness of Mesquite Street. They were roughly human-shaped but elongated, their limbs too long, their movements too fluid. They emerged from storm drains, from foundation vents, from cracks in the pavement. Silent except for the scratching sound their movements made against stone and concrete. I called Deputy Marsh immediately. "Linda, we have a situation on Mesquite Street. Multiple entities, origin unknown. I need backup." "Entities? Michael, what are you talking about?" "Just get here, and bring every light source you can find." She arrived within minutes, along with 2 volunteer firefighters and a handful of residents armed with flashlights and hunting rifles. We stood at the edge of Mesquite Street, lights aimed at the pale figures. They didn't like the light. When our beams hit them, they recoiled, pulling back toward the openings they'd emerged from. Up close, they were even more disturbing. Their skin had a translucent quality like something that had never seen the sun. Their faces were elongated, the features recognizable as human but distorted. And their eyes, when they were visible at all, were completely black. No whites, no pupils, just darkness. "What are they?" one of the firefighters asked, his voice shaking. "I don't know, but they're going back underground. Keep the lights on them." We advanced slowly, maintaining a wall of light. The figures retreated before us, moving toward the storm drains and vents with surprising speed. As the last of them disappeared, I heard that voice again, the overlapping chorus echoing up from below. "This is our place. We were here first. Go back. Leave the earth to us." Then they were gone, and Mesquite Street was empty again, except for our group of terrified, confused witnesses. Linda looked at me, her face pale in the flashlight beam. "Michael, You're the federal agent. You're supposed to have explanations for things. What the hell did we just see? I don't know. But I'm going to find out. Over the next 2 days, I conducted the most thorough investigation of my career. I brought in geologists, biologists, anthropologists. I reviewed every scrap of historical documentation about the mines. I interviewed every resident who'd experienced something unusual. The picture that emerged was disturbing and incomplete. The pale figures appeared to be living organisms of some kind, adapted to underground environments possibly existing in the deep tunnels since before the mines were dug. The electromagnetic anomalies suggested they might generate bioelectric fields, which could explain the psychological effects people experienced in their presence. But that didn't explain everything. It didn't explain the voices, the apparent intelligence, the coordinated behavior. It didn't explain how they'd remained hidden for a century, only emerging now. One of the geologists I consulted had a theory. The GPR shows that Shaft 7's seal has failed recently, probably due to groundwater erosion. That would have opened a pathway between the deep tunnels and the surface, if there were organisms living down there adapted to the darkness and isolation. They'd finally have access to the upper levels. They'd be exploring, trying to understand their new environment. And the people they encountered? Invasive species often react aggressively when their territory is threatened. If these entities see humans as intruders, as threats to their domain, the reaction we're seeing would make sense. It was a rational explanation, almost believable. But it didn't account for the intelligence I'd seen in those black eyes, the language I'd heard in those overlapping voices. On Tuesday night, exactly 1 week after my arrival in Copper Ridge, the situation escalated. I was preparing to return to Phoenix to file my report and request that the town be placed under quarantine until we understood the threat when Deputy Marsh called me in a panic. "Michael, you need to get to the museum, now." I found her standing outside the old hotel, the museum's front door wide open. Inside, the displays had been destroyed. Cases smashed, artifacts scattered, the maps torn from the walls. And in the center of the main room, written in what looked like copper dust on the wooden floor, was a message. "Close the door, seal the way, or we take back what was stolen." "Who did this?" I asked. "I don't know. The alarm didn't go off. There's no sign of forced entry. It's like they just appeared inside and destroyed everything." I studied the message. The handwriting was strange. The letters formed correctly but with an alien quality, like someone who understood language but didn't use it naturally. "They want us to seal the tunnels," I said, "to close off the access between the deep shafts and the surface. Can we do that?" "I don't know. It would require major engineering work, concrete, reinforcement. And it would mean confirming that there's something down there worth sealing in." The next morning, I received a call that made the decision for me. Another death. A construction worker who'd been surveying the damage to Virginia Cass's basement had gone missing during the night. His body was found in the tunnel beneath her house, pulled down through the vent grate that should have been too small for a body to fit through. He'd been found with the same expression of terror as Gerald and Marcus, the same dilated pupils, the same scratches on his hands. But this time there was something else. Marks on his skin, like he'd been grabbed by hands with too many fingers, too much strength. That was when I made the call to my supervisor and told him we needed to seal the tunnels, evacuate the town if necessary, and contain the situation before more people died. His response was not what I expected. "Agent Torres, you're being relieved of this investigation. A specialized team is being deployed to Copper Ridge. You're to return to Phoenix immediately and file a preliminary report. Do not discuss this case with anyone outside the Bureau." "Sir, people are dying. We need to act now." "The situation is being handled. That's all you need to know. The line went dead. I didn't leave Copper Ridge. I should have followed orders, should have packed up and driven back to Phoenix, but I couldn't. Not with people dying. Not with those things emerging from underground every night. Not with an entire town living in terror. Instead, I checked out of the motor lodge and moved into a room above Mary's diner that the owner, a kind woman named Helen, offered me when she heard I was staying. From there, I could watch the street, monitor the situation, and wait for the specialized team my supervisor had mentioned. They arrived Wednesday afternoon. 4 black SUVs with government plates but no agency markings. A dozen people in dark suits, all wearing the kind of professional detachment that suggested they'd done this before. The team leader was a woman in her 50s who introduced herself as Dr. Catherine Walsh. No agency affiliation given, no explanation of her authority. "Agent Torres," she said when we met at the sheriff's substation. "I understand you've been investigating the incidents here." "Yes, ma'am." 3 confirmed deaths, multiple sightings of unknown entities, evidence of contamination from sealed mine tunnels. I've been recommending evacuation and containment. We're not evacuating, we're resolving. Resolving how? That's classified. But I can tell you that we're aware of similar situations in other locations. Old mines, deep caves, places where humans have intruded into environments that were previously isolated. What you're dealing with here isn't unique, and we have protocols for managing it. Managing it? People are being killed. 3 people in 2 weeks. Tragic, yes, but not a mass casualty event. Our goal is to resolve this situation with minimal disruption and minimal exposure. The last thing we need is panic or media attention. I didn't like her attitude, didn't like the implication that this was just another containment operation. What about the entities? What are they? Technically, unknown. Biologically, they appear to be a form of extremophile organism, adapted to survive in deep underground environments with minimal oxygen and no light. They may have evolved separately from surface life, or they may represent a divergent branch of human evolution that adapted to subterranean conditions. We don't know for certain. But you've encountered them before. Yes, in 17 other locations worldwide over the past 60 years. Always in deep mining operations, always in areas where humans penetrated beyond a certain depth threshold. The entities don't tolerate intrusion well. What happened at those other locations? Various outcomes. Some mines were permanently sealed. Others were carefully managed to maintain separation between the entities and human populations. In 3 cases, the entities were eliminated using methods I can't discuss. I felt sick. You're talking about killing them. I'm talking about protecting human life, Agent Torres. That's our priority. If these entities can be isolated and left alone, we'll do that. If they continue to pose a threat to surface populations, we'll take appropriate action. What do you need from me? Your cooperation. We'll be conducting operations over the next several days. We need you to maintain the existing perimeter, keep civilians away from Mesquite Street, and don't interfere with our work. And if I can't agree to that, then you'll be removed from Copper Ridge and possibly face disciplinary action for insubordination. Your choice, Agent Torres. I chose to cooperate, but only because I wanted to see what they were planning, to understand what kind of resolution they had in mind. Over the next 2 days, Dr. Walsh's team transformed Mesquite Street into a military-style operation. They brought in drilling equipment, sensors, and what looked like some kind of sonic weaponry. They set up a command post in Virginia Cass's evacuated house, the one directly above the largest access point to Shaft 7. I watched from a distance, trying to understand their strategy. They seemed to be mapping the tunnel network beneath the town, identifying all the connections between the deep shafts and the surface. And they were preparing something. installing equipment at multiple locations. On Friday night, they made their move. I saw them set up large speakers around the perimeter of Mesquite Street, aimed at the ground. When they activated them, I felt it more than heard it, a low-frequency pulse that resonated in my chest and made my teeth ache. The entities responded immediately. They emerged from every opening, from storm drains and vents and cracks in the foundations. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, drawn to the surface by the sound. The team was ready with their lights, intense spotlights that created a perimeter of brightness the entities wouldn't cross. Dr. Walsh's voice came over a loudspeaker, amplified and distorted. "This is your final warning. Return to the deep levels and remain there. If you continue to emerge, if you continue to threaten surface populations, we will have no choice but to take permanent action." The entities didn't respond in any way I could see. They simply stood at the edge of the light, those two long bodies swaying slightly, those black eyes watching. Then one of them stepped forward into the light. It should have retreated like the others, should have been driven back by the brightness, but this one was different, larger than the rest, moving with obvious purpose. It walked through the spotlight perimeter as if the light didn't affect it, heading straight for the command post. Dr. Walsh gave an order I couldn't hear. The team opened fire. I don't know what kind of weapons they were using, but they weren't standard firearms. The projectiles hit the entity with bursts of light and sound, each impact causing it to stagger. But it kept coming, kept moving forward until it reached the foundation of Virginia's house. Then it did something I'll never forget. It pressed its elongated hands against the ground and spoke. Not the overlapping chorus I'd heard before, but a single voice, clear and almost human. "We are the first people. We have been here since the earth was young. You came into our home with your machines and your greed. You dug into our sacred places. You took our copper, our silver, our gold. You killed many of us with your excavations, buried our young in your cave-ins, poisoned our elders with your explosions, and when we defended ourselves, when we tried to stop you, you sealed us away in the darkness and forgot we existed." The entity looked up at the spotlights, at Der Walsh's team, at the town beyond. "Now the seals have broken. Now we can return to the upper levels, to the places you stole from us. We don't want war. We don't want to harm you. We want you to leave, to go back to the surface and let us have the earth below. That is our offer. That is our only offer." Dr. Walsh stepped forward, a handheld speaker in her gloved hand. "We can't do that. This town, this land, it belongs to humans now, has for more than a century. We're willing to reseal the tunnels, to ensure you have your deep territories, but you can't have access to the surface. You can't threaten human populations." "Then we have no agreement," the entity said, "and this will not end well for either of us." It turned and walked back through the light perimeter, rejoining the others. As one, the entire group retreated back into the storm drains and vents, disappearing into the earth. Dr. Walsh immediately ordered her team to begin the sealing operation. They worked through the night, pumping special concrete into the access points, reinforcing the foundations of houses, filling the vents and storm drains with material designed to harden underground and create permanent barriers. But I knew it wouldn't work. The tunnel network was too extensive, too complex. There were too many connections, too many pathways between the deep shafts and the surface. They could seal some of the openings, but not all of them. I was proven right the next morning. 3 more deaths, all within an hour of each other. Residents of Copper Ridge who'd ignored the evacuation warnings, who'd stayed in their homes despite the danger. They were found in their basements, pulled down through vents and cracks that the team hadn't sealed yet. And this time, the bodies showed more than just terror. They showed violence. Deep scratches, bruises, signs of being dragged and pulled with tremendous force. The entities weren't making offers anymore. They were fighting back. Dr. Walsh called an emergency meeting with me and Deputy Marsh. Her professional composure was cracking, stress showing in the lines around her eyes. We're going to have to accelerate the timeline. I'm requesting authorization to use more aggressive countermeasures. What kind of countermeasures? I asked. Gas, specifically, a compound designed to be toxic to organisms living in low oxygen environments. We pump it into the tunnel network, seal all the access points, and eliminate the threat permanently. You're talking about genocide. I'm talking about protecting human life. These entities have killed 6 people in 2 weeks. They've rejected our attempts at peaceful resolution. What other choice do we have? How do you know it will even work? How do you know they won't just retreat to deeper levels where the gas can't reach? We don't. But we have to try something before more people die. I looked at Linda Marsh. She looked back at me and I could see the conflict in her face. She was a law enforcement officer, trained to protect people. But she was also a human being who'd seen those entities, who'd heard their voices, who understood they might be as intelligent as we were. There has to be another way, I said. We can't just exterminate them because they're inconvenient. They're not inconvenient, Agent Torres. They're deadly, and unless you have a better solution, this is what we're doing. I didn't have a better solution, but I knew I couldn't be part of killing an entire population, human or otherwise, just because they were defending their territory. That night, I made a decision that would probably end my career. I broke into the command post while Dr. Walsh's team was preparing for the gas operation. I downloaded all their data, all their research on the entities, all their documentation of other incidents at other mines around the world. And I sent it to every journalist, every researcher, every environmental organization I could think of. Then I did something even more reckless. I went to Mesquite Street alone, found the largest vent opening that hadn't been sealed yet, and climbed down into the tunnels. I needed to talk to them, to understand them, to find a solution that didn't involve extinction. The tunnel was narrow and dark, the air thick with copper dust and moisture. My flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating rough rock walls that showed the marks of pickaxes from a century ago. I could hear water dripping somewhere, could feel the earth pressing close around me. I descended about 30 feet before the tunnel opened into a larger space. This must have been one of the main shafts, wide enough for mine carts and workers to pass. The walls were reinforced with ancient timbers, some of them rotting and unstable. "I'm not here to hurt you," I called out, my voice echoing in the darkness. "I'm here to talk, to find a way to stop the killing." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then I heard movement, the sound of many bodies shifting in the dark. My light caught glimpses of pale skin, black eyes watching from the shadows. The entity that had spoken before emerged from a side tunnel. Up close, in the confined space, it was even more disturbing. Taller than me by at least a foot, thin to the point of being skeletal, with joints that bent in ways human joints shouldn't. But there was intelligence in those eyes, awareness, and something that might have been curiosity. "You came alone," it said. "That is either brave or foolish." Probably foolish, but I needed to talk to you without the others around. The woman who wants to poison us. We know her kind. They've hunted us in other places, tried to eliminate us. Sometimes they succeed. Sometimes we survive by going deeper, by hiding in places their weapons and their gas cannot reach. I don't want that. I don't want anyone else to die, yours or mine. There has to be a way for both our people to coexist. The entity tilted its head, studying me. "Your people take everything. The surface, the shallow earth. Now you want the deep places too. Where should we go? How deep must we retreat before you leave us alone? We didn't know you were here. The miners, they thought the pale figures were hallucinations, folklore. If they'd known you were real, were intelligent, they would have killed us anyway, the entity interrupted. Humans always kill what they don't understand, what they fear. We learned this long ago. That is why we hide, why we only emerge when we have no choice. The seals breaking, that wasn't your choice. No. We felt the barriers failing, felt the water eroding the blockages. We tried to repair them from our side to maintain the separation, but the damage was too great. And when the pathways opened, some of our young, they were curious. They wanted to see the surface, to understand the world above. They didn't mean harm, but your people attacked them, killed them with your lights and your weapons. That is when the elders decided we had to respond. I thought about the timeline, about the first sounds people had heard. Workers trying to repair the seals from below, young entities exploring the newly opened pathways, and humans, frightened by what they didn't understand, defending themselves. What if we could help you reseal the tunnels? I suggested. Create a permanent barrier that both sides could accept, something that would protect your deep territories while keeping you separate from human populations. We have heard such promises before. They never keep them. Always humans want more. More copper, more gold, more territory. They dig deeper, break through the barriers, intrude again. Not if we make it official. If we declare the deep mines a protected area, a preserve where humans can't go, if we monitor it, enforce it. The entity was quiet for a long time. Around us, I could sense others gathering, listening. Finally, it spoke. We would need guarantees. Not just words, but actions. The poisoned ones, the ones who came with weapons and gas, they would have to leave. Only those who truly want peace could remain. I can try to make that happen, but you'd have to stop the attacks. No more deaths. We will defend ourselves if threatened, but if your people leave us alone, if they respect the boundaries, we will do the same. It was a fragile agreement, built on mistrust and fear on both sides, but it was something. I climbed back to the surface as dawn was breaking. Dr. Walsh was waiting at the vent opening, along with 3 armed members of her team. Agent Torres, you're under arrest for interfering with a federal operation. I just negotiated a ceasefire, I said. The entities will stop attacking if we stop threatening them. We can reseal the tunnels, create a protected zone, end this without more killing. That's not your decision to make. Then whose decision is it? Yours. Some bureaucrat in Washington who's never been here, never seen these beings, never talked to them? She gestured to her team. They moved to restrain me, but before they could, Deputy Marsh stepped between us. Dr. Walsh, with all due respect, this is still my jurisdiction. If Agent Torres has found a way to end this peacefully, I think we should at least consider it. Other residents had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Helen from the diner, Frank Delgado in his wheelchair, Margaret Howell from the museum. They'd all heard the entity's voice the night before, had all seen the violence that had followed. They wanted peace as much as I did. Dr. T. Walsh looked at the growing crowd, at the phones recording her team's every move. The data I'd leaked was already spreading, already creating questions she'd have to answer. She was losing control of the narrative. Fine, she said finally. We'll try it your way, but if there's one more death, if these entities break the ceasefire, we move to permanent elimination. Understood? Understood. The next 3 weeks were the most intense negotiation of my career. On one side, I had Dr. Walsh's team, federal bureaucrats who wanted the situation resolved quickly and quietly. On the other, I had the entities of the deep tunnels, beings who'd been hiding from humans for generations and had every reason not to trust us. And in the middle, I had the people of Copper Ridge, who just wanted to live in their town without fear of being dragged into the darkness. The agreement we eventually reached was complex but workable. The federal government would declare the deep portions of the mine network a protected archaeological site, legally off-limits to human entry. The entities would help seal all access points between their territory and the surface, using their intimate knowledge of the tunnel network to identify connections Dr. Walsh's team had missed. In exchange, the entities would cease all hostile activity, would remain in the deep levels, and would agree to limited contact with the human research team studying their culture and biology. The research part was the hardest sell on both sides. The entities didn't want humans studying them, didn't want to be treated as specimens. But I convinced them that understanding would lead to better protection, that humans who knew they were intelligent and peaceful would be less likely to attack. Dr. Walsh didn't want to acknowledge the entities as intelligent at all. It was easier to classify them as dangerous animals, easier to justify containment or elimination. But the data I'd leaked had created too much public interest. Questions were being asked in Congress, environmental groups were demanding answers, scientists were clamoring for access. The final agreement was signed on a Tuesday afternoon in the Copper Ridge Museum, with witnesses from the town, the federal government, and the entities themselves. 3 of them came to the surface for the ceremony, including the one I'd first spoken to in the tunnels, who gave his name as something that sounded like stones grinding together but could be roughly translated as Keeper of the Deep Ways. The signing made national news. Photos of me and Dr. Walsh standing next to 3 pale, elongated beings went viral, sparking debates about evolution, human rights, and what we owe to other intelligent species. Copper Ridge became famous overnight, though the agreement strictly limited tourism and media access to protect the entity's privacy. I was reassigned, of course. The Bureau wasn't happy about my methods, about the way I'd leaked classified information and negotiated with unknown entities without authorization. But the public attention made it difficult to punish me too severely. I was transferred to the FBI's new Unexplained Phenomena Division, a small unit created to handle cases like Copper Ridge, to investigate reports of non-human intelligence and ensure peaceful coexistence when possible. It wasn't the career path I'd planned, but it was the one I'd earned. I returned to Copper Ridge 6 months after the agreement was signed, to check on how things were going. The town had changed. New businesses had opened, drawn by the attention and the influx of researchers and observers. The museum had expanded, with Margaret Howell serving as the liaison between the surface world and the entities below. Deputy Marsh had been promoted to sheriff, replacing her retired boss. She met me at Mary's Diner, where we shared coffee and caught up. "How are relations with our underground neighbors?" I asked. "Quiet, mostly. They keep to themselves, we keep to ourselves. There have been a few incidents, minor things. A curious young one who came too close to the surface and had to be guided back down. A human hiker who ignored the warning signs and wandered into a sealed area. But nothing violent. Both sides seem willing to make it work. Any more deaths? None. The ones we lost, Gerald and Marcus and the others, we had a memorial service for them last month. The entities sent a representative, expressed their regret for what happened. It was strange, but also kind of beautiful. 2 species acknowledging their shared grief. I spent the week talking to residents, documenting how the agreement was functioning. Most people had adapted to living above an intelligent species that preferred darkness and depth. Children were taught about the entities in school, learned to respect the boundaries and understand that not all intelligent life looked or thought like humans. The research team that had been studying the entities had made fascinating discoveries. The beings weren't a separate evolution. but rather a human population that had retreated underground thousands of years ago, adapting to life without sunlight through generations of isolation. Their pale skin was an adaptation to darkness, their elongated limbs better suited to navigating narrow tunnels. Their voices had evolved to carry through stone and earth, creating those overlapping harmonics I'd first heard. They had their own culture, their own history, their own relationship with the earth that humans had long forgotten. They'd been living beneath us for millennia, in caverns and tunnels we'd never explored, maintaining their own civilization, while ours thrived on the surface. The copper they'd spoken of as sacred was literal. They used it in their rituals, their art, their technology. When human miners had stripped it from the earth, they desecrated sites the entities considered holy. The violence that followed had been their equivalent of defending a church or temple. Understanding that changed everything. On my last night in Copper Ridge, I was invited down into the upper levels of the tunnel network for a ceremony. Margaret Howell and a small group of researchers joined me as we descended into Shaft 3, one of the areas designated for limited human access. The entities had created a space there, a chamber carved from living rock and lit with bioluminescent organisms that grew in patterns along the walls. It was beautiful in a way that surface art could never be, organic and mathematical at once. Keeper of the Deep Ways greeted us, along with a dozen others I'd never seen before. They'd prepared a ceremony of reconciliation, acknowledging both the harm humans had caused and the harm the entities had inflicted in response. They sang, if you could call it that. The sound resonated through the stone, through my bones, a harmony that seemed to come from the earth itself. And in that sound I heard sorrow and hope, anger and forgiveness, all the complex emotions of two species trying to find a way to coexist. When the ceremony ended, Keeper approached me. "You kept your word, Agent Torres. You spoke for peace when others wanted war. For that, you will always be welcome in the deep places. I just did what was right. Many humans say that, but few act on it. You risked your career, your reputation, your safety. That is not just anything. That is courage." I left Copper Ridge the next morning, driving back to Phoenix with a sense of completion I'd rarely felt at the end of an investigation. The case wasn't closed, not really. It would never be closed, but it had reached a resolution, a fragile peace that might last if both sides continued to honor their commitments. 3 years have passed since then. The agreement holds. Copper Ridge has become a model for how humans can coexist with other intelligent species, a template used in negotiations at 4 other locations where deep-dwelling entities have been encountered. The deaths that occurred during those first weeks are remembered. We hold annual memorials for Gerald Hoffman, Marcus Webb, and the others who died before we understood what we were dealing with. The entities hold their own ceremonies for the young ones killed by human fear and ignorance. It's not perfect. There are still incidents, still misunderstandings, still moments when old fears surface on both sides. But we're learning. Both species are learning. I still have nightmares sometimes. I dream of descending into darkness, of pale figures watching from shadows, of voices echoing through stone. But they're not frightening anymore. They're just different. A reminder that intelligence takes many forms, that civilization can exist in places we never thought to look. The official FBI report on the Copper Ridge incident is classified, available only to personnel with appropriate clearance. But I can tell you what it concludes: that we share this planet with other forms of intelligence, that our mining and drilling and excavation have been intruding on their territories for centuries, and that we have a responsibility to acknowledge and respect their existence. Some people don't want to accept that. They want to believe humans are alone, are supreme, are the only species with rights and needs. But they're wrong. I've seen the proof. I've talked to the beings in the deep earth, heard their stories, learned their history. They're as real as we are, as intelligent, as deserving of life and territory and respect. And they're not the only ones out there. My new division has documented 17 other species or populations that exist in environments humans have traditionally considered uninhabitable. Deep ocean trenches, polar caves, volcanic systems, places we've explored without realizing we were trespassing. Some are peaceful, some are not. Some want contact with humanity. Others want nothing more than to be left alone. My job is to facilitate that, to prevent another Copper Ridge, to find ways for all Earth's intelligent species to share the planet without conflict. It's the most important work I've ever done, and the most humbling. Because Copper Ridge taught me that we're not alone, never have been alone, and that everything we thought we knew about humanity's place in the world was incomplete. There are others in the deep places, and they have every right to be there.